You are you, that's all that matters to me. You are you, and only you can be the one I love and yearn for, the one that my heart burns for. Yes, you are you, and that makes you best of all. Part 1. You are you. May 23rd, 1988, 10:30 a.m., Motown Industries, Los Angeles. That period of time before the selling of my company was probably the most confusing of my life. In about a month, I would surrender my title as chairman of the board of Motown Records. As I made my way through the heavy wooden doors of our 18th floor corporate offices, I could feel the panic. It was everywhere, a quiet panic. Faye Hale, a black woman in her 50s, one of the many unsung heroes of Motown, greeted me in the lobby with a cheerful good morning and her everyday beaming smile. But her eyes gave her away. She was petrified. For almost 30 years, she, like so many others, had been loyal to me. For almost 30 years, she had fought every president of the record company, including me, to keep us from overshipping and overpaying for product. I knew she loved me, and she knew I loved her. I also knew she was about to lose her job, her life. Yet she and I chatted as if nothing was happening. A year and a half earlier, I had come close to selling, but the day before I was to sign the papers, I changed my mind. I couldn't go through with it. MCA had offered me more money than I could spend in a lifetime, but I just didn't want to give it up at that time. All those restrictions they put in the contract didn't help either. Refrain from the record business for 5 years. Refrain from using your name. Refrain, forbid. Shall not engage. Yeah? Well, shall not sign. How's that? MCA was shocked, and so was I, but it seems the fighter inside me had taken over. That night, December 30th, 1986, I passed on the deal even though my company was losing millions. When the news broke that I had refused to sell, people were overjoyed. Calls and letters came from all over the world telling me how much Motown was loved, respected, and how our music had touched their lives. This outpouring of love and admiration was overwhelming. It made me feel like a hero or something just because I didn't sell. I got psyched. I would answer the bell one more time and come out fighting, creating new hits just like the old days. Get everybody together, get inspired, perspired, fired up, go for the throat. We need hits. No, smashes. That's the only way, smash product. There had always been a standing debate in our company as to which was more important, the creative department or the marketing department. Creative had always won. Our slogan, "It's what's in the grooves that counts," was proven right over and over again. Great records had always solved any and all problems for me. But gung-ho as I was, marshaling forces, reshuffling and bringing in manpower, digging in at the studio, had not been enough. Times had changed. Now, some 17 months later, as I gazed from my office window across the forest of corporate buildings to the Capitol Records Tower, I realized many of them, too, were in the process of being taken over. Everybody was either buying or selling. Technology was moving faster than the speed of light. A video of a song could now be played once for 200 million people. And if 1% bought the record, you had a 2 million seller, a super hit by any standard. Conglomerates were taking over. These multi-corporate entities with their powerful foothold and a radically changing world economy had the edge, a big edge. For years, we had shown the world what we could do with talent and ingenuity as our base. And now these corporate entities were showing me what they could do with money and power as theirs. I, who had prided myself on always being ahead of the game, had fallen behind. My company was in no position to take advantage of these new developments. We had too much overhead and had to gross $40 million a year just to break even. Selling wasn't just the right thing to do. It was the only thing to do. I shifted my eyes to the gleaming baby grand in my office. It seemed to be saying, Come, let me soothe you. I went to the piano and started running over some of the chord changes that had formed the foundation of many songs I'd written. As I pounded away at those simple chords, humming and singing anything that came to mind, I was back to basics and comfortable. The realization of what I had accomplished first brought pride, then sadness. Sadness because now I understood the real reason I was in trouble. It wasn't the conglomerates or the changing world. The world had been changing since the day I was born. The real reason was I was just tired. I didn't want to do it anymore. It had long stopped being fun for me. The explosion of so many things at the same time, the industry, the artist, the music, together with the normal internal and external problems that growth presents, had finally caught up with me. On top of all that were over 2 decades of rumors, gossip, and misinformation that I had never taken time to deal with. Thoughts of the past were bombarding me, but they couldn't overcome the problems of the present. What do they mean I can't sell my own company? I had yelled at my secretary, Edna Anderson, a few days before. Edna's black militancy had not mellowed much in the 16 years she had been my right arm. They say Motown means too much to too many people to sell, she said. It's an institution. How can you sell a way of life? They say? Who the hell is they? Do they know I'm losing millions? My voice had jumped to high C. She knew when that happened it was time to back off. She said nothing. How in the hell can anybody tell me I can't sell something I created, nurtured, and built from nothing? Edna watched me for a moment, then came over and put her hand on my shoulder and said in her all-too-familiar, sarcastic Southern drawl, "Success is an MF, ain't it?" If she had said the full word, I would have laughed out loud, but as it was, I smiled. I knew very well who they were. They were the people who had grown up with Motown and loved it the same as I did. They were the people who believed in me and Motown no matter what they had heard or read in the newspapers. They were the people who believed, and rightly so, that Motown was a dream that happened to have come true. They were the fans who collected every record we made from day one. They were the employees, the dedicated people I knew would go down on any ship I was commanding. They were the white people around the world, whose main connection to black culture had been through our music. They were the black people around the world who felt their heritage was being sold down the drain. Yes, I knew who they were. My anger just as quickly turned to gratitude for all those who were letting me know that after almost 30 years, the legend of my company and the music we made was now even bigger than ever. I knew I had to protect that legacy. Still banging on the piano, I reflected back to the early 60s, to a house at 2648 West Grand Boulevard in Detroit, a place we called Hitsville, USA. The Hitsville sign over the door let it be known that if you set foot inside, you were expected to sing, dance, write, produce, sell, or manage. That name kept our mission in focus. I knew something very dynamic was taking place. This thing was becoming a force to be reckoned with, and I was its leader. The successes, the challenges, and our determination were meshing together into something tangible. It was turning me into a real boss. I said, and others did. I complained, and they strained to do better. I was pushing and driving people beyond their sense of what was possible. I expected more. They gave more. Our work was producing results that gave me confidence, even more confidence than I already had. The mixing of our respective talents inside those walls gave me my first taste of something that I would grow quite used to: power. The irony was that it would slowly transfer from me to the artist, the people I used it for. I never realized there was such a thin line between their having to laugh at my jokes and my having to laugh at theirs. One day you wake up and the stars you polished so hard to shine are not only shining but in orbit, out of control of themselves and in control of you. Power its uses and misuses, is something that has fascinated me over the years. My first encounter with it came when I was very young. That night, the house erupted with joy. It was 1938, and Joe Louis had just knocked out Max Schmeling. The whole family exploded out the front door, jumping and hollering like a bunch of crazy folks. Echoes of the announcer's voice still ringing in my ears. Left to the body, right to the head, left, right, left. A smashing right to the chin. He's down. Schmeling is down. He's out. Max Schmeling is knocked out. The winner and heavyweight champion of the world, the Brown Bomber, Joe Louis. Horns were honking. The streets were filled with madness. Everybody was reacting the same as we were. Joy, pride, ecstasy. How could I ever do anything in my life that could make this many people happy? I thought to myself. Whenever Joe Louis fought, it was a holiday for black folks. I was only 8 at the time, but I knew Joe Louis was a hero of all the people, but he was black like me. I knew what that meant. Even at 8 years old, I had gotten a taste of the world, the real world, the white world. I remembered back when I was almost 5 and thought the world was all black except for Santa Claus. The few white people who came to our neighborhood I thought were accidents of nature. But then around the time I started kindergarten, I was jolted into reality, not once, but twice. Christmas had always been the most magical day of the year for me. Rushing downstairs into Wonderland, I always found things I wanted. One Christmas, I was pushing down the sidewalk on my brand new red scooter. I shouted to a kid from the neighborhood, "Hey, look what Santa brought me." "Junior, you know it ain't no Santa Claus, don't you?" "Oh, yes, there is," I replied. "Or where do all these presents come from?" "Your father put them there, stupid." I rushed home and told my sister Gwen what had happened. When she said he was right, I was devastated, but acted like it was no big deal. I told her I really knew it all the time, but I was dying inside, realizing that the wonderment I had known all my life on that special morning would never be again. A fraud. I had been betrayed by, of all people, my own parents. Why? After a week or so, it became very clear. Because they loved me and wanted to see me thrilled and happy. That was the good news. The bad news was I would now automatically question everything anybody told me, including my own parents. Only in retrospect would I fully recognize the irony of my having felt betrayed by Mother and Pop. After all, this was during the Great Depression, and to be able to create that vision of Wonderland for us, Mother and Pop had to sacrifice and save all year long. Not only that, they didn't even take the credit for it. They gave it to Santa Claus. I thought there could be nothing worse than no Santa Claus. I was wrong. A short time later, I discovered the world was not all black at all. Worse, it was all white except for a few other people. And we were considered the lowest class of those other people. Niggers. I didn't know exactly what the word meant, but I knew it was real bad. I remember rushing home from school one day, telling my mother a white boy called me one. "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me," is all she said. Her words were strong and gave me comfort at the time, but I still felt bad. Though our parents tried to protect us from the outside world of racism by giving us lots of love and strengthening us through philosophy and religion, I could see how they sometimes cover their own pain with laughter. Some of the kids in our neighborhood even made fun of themselves with chants like, "If you're white, you're all right. If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're brown, you can stick around. But if you're black, get back." Even in jest, nobody wanted to be black. But now, in 1938, 3 years later, It wasn't so bad to be black. A black man, Joe Louis, was the greatest hero in the universe, at least for the moment. But in that moment, a fire started deep inside me, a burning desire to be special, to win, to be somebody. No matter how poor, I think every black family in those days had a little upright piano. The only person I know who could play one was my Uncle B.A., but he wouldn't be caught dead playing ours. It was old and out of tune. A somewhat elegant gentleman with a pompous manner, Uncle B.A. had once been a concert pianist. He used to let me come over to his house because I liked hearing him play the classics, and he started giving me free lessons. Uncle B.A. was of the old school and forced me to study music theory and practice boring scales and arpeggios endlessly. I was too impatient for that. But I made a discovery. Those arpeggios he made me play were made up of chords played one note at a time in rapid succession. Playing three of the different notes at the same time made a chord that brought little melodies into my head. Once I started playing and singing those melodies, there was no way I could concentrate on studying theory. I quit my lessons after a year. Messing around with the only chords I knew, C, F, and G, I began to put some of my thoughts to music. Before long, I was learning to play everything by ear, especially the different types of boogie-woogie I heard on the radio. My favorite was Hazel Scott's boogie-woogie, but I eventually created my own. Barry's boogie had a bouncy, up-tempo walking bass line that my stretching fingers had trouble playing. But I soon got good at it and became a star on that little upright. I was the seventh of 8 kids, and Pop was forever telling us how hard he'd work for just $2 a day to learn plastering. He wanted us to appreciate the value of learning a trade, so he made us all work hard for little or nothing. Fuller and George got the little, Bobby and I got the nothing. Whenever any of us complained, Pop would launch into a story we'd heard over and over again about how rough times had been in the South. Shuck boy, he'd chuckle, y'all children don't know nothing about what real work is. Not only did my papa work for somebody else, he was owned by somebody else. What could be worse than that? I could never fully comprehend the idea of being owned by somebody else. Mother and Pop were forever giving us messages, one way or the other. They were quick to praise us for good deeds and just as quick to punish us for bad ones. I was 6 and a half when we moved to the east side of Detroit. It was an important turning point for the family. During the Depression years, Pop had not only survived, hustling his way up from being an apprentice plasterer to getting his contractor's license, but had saved enough to make a down payment on our very own 2-story commercial building at the corner of Farnsworth and St. Antoine Streets. On the upper floor of the building, there were 2 flats where the family lived, and on the street level were 4 storefronts. The biggest was on the corner and became our new grocery store, which Mother named after the famous black educator, Booker T. Washington. We were the only colored people in the neighborhood who owned a commercial building, and for the first time, people looked up to us. But Pop was smart. He remained humble. He loved serving people at his corner grocery store. He sold for the lowest prices he could and was forever telling us, the customer is always right. That made no sense to me. How could all those people be smarter than we were? They're spending their money, Pop would say. That makes them right. At Balch Elementary, my younger brother Robert always got A's and B's. I got D's and E's. In those days, E's did not mean excellent. When he came home with the C, he was a bum. If I got a C, I was a hero. I knew that C meant average, and I resented that I was getting applauded for it. Still, I couldn't seem to do any better. I wanted so much to impress people that I would do anything to show off. I even learned my ABCs backwards. One of the 4 storefronts in our building was Delaney's Cleaners. It was always a thrill whenever I'd pass by and hear Mr. Delaney bragging to his friends about how smart I was. Junior, he'd say, do the alphabet backwards. Oh, sure, I'd respond and quickly rattle off Z, Y, X, W, V, U, T, S, R, Q, P, O, N, M, L, K, J, I, H, G, F, E, D, C, B, A. I loved the proud, smug look he'd give to his impressed friends. They thought I was the smartest kid around. I could rattle off my ABCs backwards perfectly. But what they didn't know was I had trouble saying them frontwards. When I wasn't working with Pop in his plastering business, I tried other things to make money. I had a short-lived shoeshine stand and a brief stint selling newspapers. I even had my first taste of trying to make money at something I loved, music. Lloyd Sims, a kid from the neighborhood, had one of the most beautiful voices I'd ever heard. He sounded just like Bill Kenny of the Ink Spots, but he was shy. However, I managed to convince him that, 1, he had talent, 2, he could make people happy, and 3, we could make money. I took him from door to door to sing for neighbors. Everybody loved him. We made about 50 cents a house. He was talented. I thought I was too, but all I could play was some simple chords and one-finger stuff. Nevertheless, I'd be right there trying to accompany him whenever I thought I could. But it seemed whenever I did, people's faces would quickly let me know that I should cool it on the piano. Some would motion to me with their hands or even say something out loud. I hated it when they did that, but I was cool. I would just sort of stop playing like it was my own idea. It was fun while it lasted, but I think people finally convinced Lloyd I wasn't needed. This experience made me realize that maybe I shouldn't have quit my piano lessons only after 1 year. During the years of World War II, another war was raging inside me. That little upright had taken on a major contender, boxing gloves. At the age of 14, I had begun amateur boxing, working out at the Brewster Center, a recreation facility for inner-city kids. One of the trainers there, Eddie Futch, had spotted me and decided to take me on. He told me he could see that I not only had great speed, but heart as well. Eddie Futch would later go on to train probably more champions than any other. In the heavyweight division alone, he trained Joe Frazier, Ken Norton, and Reddick Bowe. Mr. Futch told me I had to be serious. I was serious. Running 5 miles at 5:30 in the morning, sweating for hours in a hot gym every day, building muscles, no smoking, no drinking, no girls. The girls part really bothered me, but I wanted to be a champion, so I went for it. Whenever I wasn't at the Brewster Center training, I was somewhere writing songs which no one wanted to hear. On the one hand, I was frantic to fight like Sugar Ray Robinson, and on the other, to sing like Nat King Cole, whose velvet voice and piano playing could romance a song like no one else. But I had a voice problem. I was sort of a mixture between Nat King Cole, Billy Eckstine, and Donald Duck. My sound-alike percentage weighed heavily toward the latter. Around that time, I decided to pursue a professional boxing career. Whenever I fought, the whole family was there in my corner, strong, cheering me on. I loved it. I was always a performer in that ring, and the larger the crowd, the better. As a pro, I managed to grind out a total of 15 fights, 10 wins, 4 by knockouts, 2 draws, and 3 losses, 2 of which I will always maintain were bad decisions. I trained rigorously, getting better and better, hoping one day to get my shot at the title. Then, one hot August day in 1950, a remarkable thing happened. I was at the Woodward Avenue gym. Pitting myself against the big bag and feeling very much the victor, I decided my tired, sweating body deserved a break. As I sat down on a bench, my eyes fell on 2 posters. The first one announced the Battle of the Bands between Stan Kenton and Duke Ellington. The one below it advertised a bout between 2 young fighters. There it was again, music versus boxing. This time it was visual. I stared at those posters for some time, realizing the fighters could fight once and maybe not fight again for 3 or 4 weeks, or months, or never. The bands were doing it every night, city after city, and not getting hurt. The fighters were about 23 and looked 50. The band leaders were about 50 and looked 23. I had my answer. The war that had been raging inside me, music versus boxing, was finally over. No more sweating in a hot gym every day. No more running for 5 miles in the morning. No more abstinence. No more abstinence. That day, I took off my gloves for good. For the next few months, all I could think about was songwriting. I wrote about everything. License plates, the sky, people, love, you name it. I was a writing fool. Ideas were coming to me from everywhere, but I had trouble getting people to listen to my songs. It occurred to me that if I listened to what others had to say first, then maybe they'd be more receptive to me. So I became a good listener. It worked, but too well. I got hooked on people. Listening to their problems, thoughts, and feelings, I learned we all basically wanted and needed the same things. For instance, in our building, the Gordy print shop, owned by my sister Esther and my brothers Fuller and George, needed customers, and I had an idea to help. Fuller, I said when I went to see them about it, I just wrote a great radio commercial for you. It's a song called Let Gordy Be Your Printer Too, and it sounds just like Nat King Cole. Who's singing it, Fuller asked. I am. Interest was disappearing fast, but before he could say another word, I began snapping my fingers and singing. Whether your job is big or small, Gordy Printer will do them all. Give us a try and we'll do it right, and Gordy will be your printer for life. Let Gordy be your printer too. They liked it and arranged for me to record it in Bristol Bryan's basement studio. Bristol was a WJLB disc jockey, and soon my song was playing on the station. Some people really thought it was Nat King Cole. Business picked up and my proud family started taking me a little more seriously. Shortly after that, Mother had some friends over. I could hear voices from the dining room bragging about their sons and daughters who were in college, studying to be doctors and lawyers. It was time for me to leave the house, but I had to go through the dining room. Not good. I, a 20-year-old, was quietly making my way out when I heard this voice directed my way. And what do you do, young man? I stopped. I write songs. I know, he said. But what do you do? What could I say? How dare he dismiss my songwriting? This was just as much a profession as medicine or law, and it could make thousands of people happy. That's it. I write songs. He looked at Mother. As happy as she had been at my doing the commercial, she hadn't exactly planned on that being my life's work. I felt sorry for her. I realized then that parents had peer pressure too. I left the house that day knowing more than ever I had something to prove. In listening to people, I could tell a common fear was that if they exposed who they really were, they wouldn't be loved. This was something I thought a lot about. If someone didn't love you for yourself but for who you were trying to be, the relationship wouldn't last too long anyway. But if you're just you, you'll eventually be loved by the right person. So You Are You was how I titled my next song. After I finished it, I saw an ad in a magazine where for $25 you could send off a coupon with a recording of a song and get sheet music written. I jumped on it right away. A few weeks later, I received this beautiful piece of sheet music, my first complete song, all professionally written. I was legit. Thinking of general audiences even then, I had written my song with Doris Day in mind. She was America's girl next door. I knew when she heard it, she would feel about it the same as I did and would die to record it. Excited, I sent it off with a little note saying, "Dear Doris, Here's a song I've written for you. I addressed it to Doris Day, Hollywood, California. Return address, Barry Gordy Jr., 5139 Sanat Wine, Detroit, Michigan. I was on top of the world with anticipation. I waited and waited and waited. After about 3 months, finally, a letter came. But it was not from Doris Day. It started with greetings and ended with please report to Fort Custer. I had been drafted. When I returned from Korea 2 years later in 1953, I opened up a jazz record store with my separation pay from the Army. I was a big fan of people like Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk, Miles Davis, Earl Garner, and Oscar Peterson. To me, jazz was the only pure art form. All the hip young people were into it, and I was sure the people in my neighborhood would love it as much as I did. Pop, although somewhat disappointed that I didn't want to take over his plastering business, borrowed money from the church credit union and loaned it to me. My brother George invested some of his own money, becoming a partner in the 3D Record Mart. We created a heavy jazz atmosphere that you could feel the moment you walked in. Using the album covers, we decorated the walls with the hottest jazz musicians of the time. I thought it was great. That is, until my very first customer came in. "Excuse me," he said, "do you have any records by Muddy Waters?" "Muddy who?" "Muddy Waters," he said. "Never heard of him." "You never heard of Muddy Waters? How about John Lee Hooker, Jimmy Reed, B.B. King?" "I'm sorry," I told him. "We don't sell that stuff here." When he asked why, I explained. Jazz is complex. Jazz is as different as each musician playing it. Those blues records pretty much say all the same thing. I love my baby, but my baby don't love me. He looked at me like I was crazy and left. I knew I had to educate my customers about the beauty of jazz right away. But these people were hard-headed. They wanted what they wanted, and they wanted the blues. I told them to try Hastings Street. They did. Meanwhile, the jazz lovers were few and far between. It dawned on me one day that I was losing the store. I started realizing this was a business, not a school. And in trying to educate my customers about great jazz, we were going broke. I remembered what Pop had tried to get me to understand many years before. The customer was always right. It was becoming very clear to me now. It was time for me to change my ways. It was time for me to get the blues. The more I heard the blues, the more I liked it. There was an honesty about it. It was just as pure and real as jazz. Ironically, that same simplicity I rejected in the blues was the very thing that people related to. This important lesson came too late to save the store, but it would not be too late to make a difference in my songwriting. After the store failed, I took another turn at writing songs full-time. Pop let me live rent-free in an old apartment building he owned on Meldrum Street. In return, I helped take care of the place. Shortly before my record store closed, I met and married a lovely young lady by the name of Thelma Coleman. Soon I had my own family to support. As a young father, I loved spending time with my 3 children. Nothing inspired me more than those young, open minds. Thelma's parents helped us a lot with food and toys. They were wonderful grandparents, but their helpful hands became very painful to my self-esteem. Before long, my songwriting endeavors became as much a joke to me as they were to everyone else. I guess I'd been called a bum for so long, I thought maybe I was. So I decided I was willing to take a real job, a 9-to-5er. When my mother-in-law heard I would work, she wasted no time in using her union connections to get me a job at the Lincoln Mercury assembly plant. Little did I know when I started that job how important to my future that assembly line was going to be. For $86.40 a week, I fastened upholstery and chrome strips to slow-moving car frames being pulled down the line on conveyor belts. It was a snap. I learned it so fast I could jump into each car as it arrived, do my job, get out, and have time to spare. Before long, that extra time was devoted to singing and writing songs. Since I had no piano, I had to devise another method of writing. I used Mary Had a Little Lamb, the simplest song I could think of, to form the basis to remember song ideas in my head. I gave each tone of the scale a number from 1 to 7. So Mary Had a Little Lamb turned out to be 3 2 1 2 3 3 3 2 2 2 3 5 5 3 2 1 2 3 3 3 2 2 3 2 1. I practiced other simple songs, putting numbers to them as well. Once I could identify each tone with a number of the scale, I had it made. As I began to create interesting melodies in my head, I would associate each tone with a number. This allowed me to remember my musical ideas. Working fast up the slow-moving line, getting ahead of myself, I had time to rush back to my station and write down the numbers that corresponded with my new ideas. How wonderful. Getting paid for a real job and composing songs at the same time. On top of that, I hustled every way I could to make extra money. I worked all the overtime I could get and even joined a poker club. I eventually put a down payment on a 2-story house at 414 Melbourne, which had 2 kitchenette apartments upstairs that I rented out for $15 a week. With that extra $120 a month, less my monthly house note of $80, I was living rent-free and making a profit of $40. I'd been at the factory now for about 2 years, hustling like mad and still writing my songs. I was happy until one day during a lunch break, I heard one of the older guys bragging that he had only 3 more years before retirement. Another guy was not as happy. He said he had 12 years before he could really start living. Then it hit me. I had 33 years left before I could live. What? That's when I realized I was on a treadmill, moving fast, but not really going anywhere. I had money saved up plus the profit I was making from the kitchenettes and a backlog of song ideas. It was now time to pursue my dream. Soon after quitting my job, I bought me a silk suit, got my hair processed, losing any resemblance to that of a factory worker. People seemed to like me more, but to Thelma and her parents, I was back to being a bum again. And maybe I was, but I was a happy one. In retrospect, I can see how difficult it must have been to be married to me, a creative person. I was a dreamer, my wife was a worrier, and I probably made her that way, always coming home with new thoughts, new ideas, new moods. It had to be real tough. In 1957, music was everywhere. People were singing on street corners, in barbershops, nightclubs, the movies, on the radio. Now that music was my business, I wanted to be part of all of it. During the day, I worked on my songs. And at night, I made the scene, hanging out with people who worked in and around music, listening and learning. All the beautiful people came to life at night, the sharpest dressed black and white people I had ever seen. John R. Street was jumping with clubs like Sonny Wilson's Garfield Lounge, the Chesterfield Lounge, and nearby, the Frolic Show Bar. But where you would usually find me was at the hottest club of all, the Flame Show Bar. Top acts performed on the stage built right into the bar. One night it might be Dinah Washington, on another Sarah Vaughan or Billie Holiday. They were my favorites. One of the great things about the Flame was that my sister Gwen owned the photo concession there. Anna worked for her, taking pictures of the clientele. Everybody adored Gwen and Anna and seemed pleased to meet me, their brother, the songwriter. The night Gwen introduced me to Al Green was a big one for me. Besides owning the club, he managed a few singers, Johnny Ray, Laverne Baker, and a guy he had just signed, Jackie Wilson. Al told me he also owned a music publishing company by the name of Pearl Music and was always looking for new material. At the offices of Pearl Music, I met a songwriter by the name of Roquel Billy Davis. We started writing together, getting input from my sister Gwen. We wrote for all of Al Green's artists, especially Jackie Wilson. The winds were blowing my way. But by late spring, those same winds brought on the rain. "Are you Barry Gordy?" the man on my doorstep asked. When I told him I was, he handed me an official-looking letter and left. The last time I'd gotten such a letter, I had been drafted. This time, I was being divorced. I grabbed some things and headed for Gwen's house. When I arrived at Gwen's, I was a wreck. I told her I was being divorced. So what, she said. That's not the worst thing in the world. But what about my kids? What about them, she said. You'll always be their father, and they'll always love you the same as we do. It's funny how tears come at the strangest moments. I couldn't hold them back. I hugged her quickly so she couldn't see me crying. The emotions I felt that night are still hard to explain. All I know is that at that moment, I loved Gwen more than anything else in the world. Still depressed and scared, but happy because I felt so loved. I sat down at her piano. The words came easily. Someone to care, someone to share. Lonely hours and moments of despair. To be loved, to be loved. Oh, what a feeling, to be loved. I had written a song. I had written a beautiful love song. At the time, I thought I was writing To Be Loved strictly about the love of my children. Later, I realized that I was writing about more, a lot more. My family, my friends, everybody. And though I didn't know it then, I had found the key to who I was and all I ever wanted, to be loved.
I will build you a castle with a tower so high it reaches the moon. I'll gather melodies from birdies that fly and compose you a tune. Give you loving warm as mama's oven, and if that don't do, then I'll try something new.
Part 2, I'll try something new. The first time I met George Goldner, he was in Detroit doing a recording session at United Sound Studios. George was the colorful owner of Gone In Records out of New York. I heard you're a good songwriter, was the first thing he said when I was introduced to him in the lobby of the studio. I am, I said, smiling. He asked what I thought made a great record. Many things, I replied. First of all, the song should be honest and have a good concept. The performance is important, but the song's got to be saying something. Oh, is that so, he said. Probably the first thing people relate to is the melody, which include hooks, phrases of repetition, I went on. If the hook is infectious, it's usually a hit. If it's monotonous, usually not. George nodded slowly. He was impressed. Got any money, he asked me. What's that? He pulled out a $100 bill and gave it to me. What's this for? It's a down payment in case we ever do any business together. Then he left. I was elated. It was more than just $100. It was a perfect stranger who saw value in my creative ideas. Besides the end we had at Pearl Music, other companies were becoming aware of Roquel and me. Laverne Baker at Atlantic Records was hot with a record called Jim Dandy. We wrote an answer to it that she recorded. Jim Dandy got married. A song we wrote for Eddie James on Chess Records called All I Could Do Was Cry went to the top of the R&B charts. More artists and local groups were beginning to seek us out, looking for songs. Though I would go on to have many exciting times in my life, the release of our first record on Jackie Wilson ranks among the top. Jackie took Reet Petite, a so-so song, and turned it into a classic. By then, I had moved in with my sister Lucy and our darling cousin, Evelyn Turk. Since they worked during the day, I had the whole house to myself. This particular day when I heard Jolton Joe Howard from WCHB say, "And now, folks, the hottest record in the land, Reet Petite by Jackie Wilson," I was thrilled. Turning the volume up as loud as I could, I danced around the room. Passing the TV set, I turned on American Bandstand. I was shocked. There it was again. Jackie's big booming voice blasting for millions all over the country, and all those white kids dancing up a storm to my song. It was playing on local radio and national TV at the same time. Reet Petite was not only a smash in Detroit, but all over the country. Wow. My dream had come true. I was a hit songwriter. My troubles over forever. I'd be rich, all the girls I ever wanted. would now want me. Then a feeling of anger started coming over me. All those people who said I'd never be nothing would now have to eat their words. I started thinking about how I was going to get even with everybody who had ever doubted me. Wait a minute. What are you doing? You just better be happy and thankful for your own good fortune and not try to get back at anybody. After all, you're a star now, and you better act like one. I had just given myself some very valuable advice. I hadn't yet named it as such, but my cycle of success had just begun. When someone, anyone, becomes a star, his or her life goes through multiple changes brought on by fame, fortune, and power. Very few can survive this vicious cycle. People treat you differently. You're expected to pay for things you've never had to pay for before, bills, commissions, taxes. And since others treat you like a king, you expect more respect from your family and close friends. But those who really know and love you see you as the same person you always were. This cycle is an insidious trap, avoidable only by knowing that your accomplishments are only your accomplishments. They're not you. Only you are you. The cycle has some good sides too. I was so inspired that the sky became not the limit, but just the first goal. That same day I called Jackie, burning with desire to show him the song that meant the world to me. To be loved. I was still in the clouds about Reef Petite when I opened my front door a couple of days later, and there Jackie was with his pretty boy face, his upswept pompadour, and his tight-fitting suit. "What you got?" he asked. I jumped into it, pounding on the piano and singing with great soul and conviction. Okay, stop," he said. "That's enough." I hated it when he did that. One of my greatest performances thwarted. I stopped, frustrated. "Give me that paper," Jackie said, grabbing the lyric sheet off the piano. Circling his pointed finger at me, he said, "Play, play." Then he started singing.
Someone to care, someone to share, lonely hours and the moments of despair, to be loved, to be loved. Oh, what a feeling to be loved.
My emotion jumped from the square root of 1 to 100 to the 10th power. Jackie had fallen in love with the song. It was as if he had written it for himself. He brought up the entire range of emotions I had felt the night I wrote it. My tears came again and everything. Jackie was known as Mr. Excitement, strutting and dancing, spinning and turning. He would land in a perfect split, then squeeze his legs together and propel himself into a standing position just in time to drop to his knees and finish the song. Women loved him. Jackie Wilson was the epitome of natural greatness. Unfortunately for some, he set the standard I would look for in artists forever. I heard him sing many, many times, and never a bad note. A bad song maybe, but never a bad note. As important as my association was with Jackie Wilson, an even greater one began in late '57. I was in the office of Jackie's new manager, Nat Tarnopole, working on some lyrics when a group calling themselves the Matadors came in to audition for him. I watched while the group singing their hearts out, tried hard to impress Nat. I could see they had something, but Nat didn't think so. He sent them off with the advice that they should sing more like the Platters. I related to that lead singer. Disappointment was hanging on him like his oversized pants. As they left the office and started down the hallway, I followed. "Hey, I like you guys a lot," I called out. They all stopped. "You did?" the lead singer said. "Yeah, I thought you were really good." Thanking me, they introduced themselves as Ronnie White, Pete Moore, Bobby Rogers, and his cousin Claudette Rogers. "I'm William Robinson," the lead singer said, "but they call me Smokey. Who are you?" "My name is Barry Gordy." "Barry Gordy," he said, "you write for Jackie Wilson. You wrote To Be Loved and Reef Petite." "I know," I said, and asked him who had written their songs. "I did." "You got any more?" "Right here," he said, showing me a school notebook full of song lyrics written in pencil. There were about 100 songs in that notebook, and that same day he showed me every single one. I ended up rejecting all of them. But I did assure him he had a wonderful talent for expressing his feelings with poetic, catchy lyrics. As for the songs, I told him that some had clever concepts but missed the point. Others had good hooks but no real story. And when there were good stories, they weren't unique enough. Other than that, I liked them. I laughed. He laughed louder. That's how it all started between Smokey and me. Our relationship was simple. I wanted to teach. He wanted to learn. He started bringing me songs on a regular basis. I continued to turn them down just as regularly. But I knew it was only a matter of time before he'd come to me with something I'd really like. That day arrived in January of 1958, when he found me with Roquel in an office at Pearl Music. Smokey burst into the room, bubbling with excitement. "Barry," he said, "man, I've got to see you." Then he whispered, "I really got it this time." Staring at him suspiciously, I nodded okay. Then, closing his eyes, and in a slow, melodic tone, he started singing. "Walked all day till my feet were tired. I was low, I just couldn't get hired. Saw a sign in a grocery store, help is slight and we need some more. I got a job, sha-da-da-da, sha-da-da-da." I was so excited. I loved it. Smokey had finally come through. An answer song to the #1 song in the country, the Silhouettes' "Get a Job." I quickly made a deal with George Goldner to put it out on his N label, and we rushed into the studio to record it. I suggested to Smokey that the Matadors change their name since they had a girl in the group. They placed names in a hat, and Smokey's choice, The Miracles, was pulled. Though it didn't chart high nationally, within a few weeks, Got a Job was one of the hottest records in Detroit, and everyone was asking for The Miracles. They became local stars overnight, and I just kind of fell into the role of being their manager. The Miracles' first show was at the Gold Coast Theater, where most of the top local acts played. Figuring we had the hottest new record in town, and rehearsing as hard as we had, I knew The Miracles would jump on that show and tear it up. It's funny how wrong you can be. They couldn't even get on or off the stage without bumping and stumbling over each other, let alone know what to say and do between songs. After the show, I told them as long as they had hit records, people would come see them anyway. And if I kept throwing them on stage, they would have to get better eventually. I took my management role very seriously, taking them everywhere to perform. It didn't matter to me how much money we made. I knew the more they worked, the more they would learn. Smokey was not only an artist I was working with and my songwriting protege. What was also developing was the beginning of a lifelong friendship. By now, I was no longer writing songs for Jackie Wilson, and many new artists were beginning to come to me. One day, 2 sisters showed up for an audition at Lucy's, hoping to get a shot at recording. Renoma Lyles and her younger sister Alice were a nice-looking duo. I didn't like their singing voices well enough to record them, but I liked them. I really liked Ray's energy and attitude. When I told them I couldn't record them at this time, Ray said she understood and asked if they could visit our rehearsals sometimes. I said okay. The very next day, she was back at Lucy's, bouncing around, helping me in every way she could. She figured out what I needed and got it for me before I even asked. Ray quickly became indispensable. Songwriting was my love, and protecting that love was the motivation for everything I did in the early years of my career. Producing the artists who sang my songs was the only way to make sure my songs were done the way I wanted. I got into publishing because I was having difficulty getting paid my songwriters' royalties from a New York publisher. I wanted to sue, but my lawyer advised me, forget it. It's not worth it. What do you mean it's not worth it? We're talking about at least $1,000. He told me I would get perhaps $200 to $300 in the settlement, but by that time the legal fees alone would be around $600. How could a company stay in business that way and not pay writers, I said. Some companies don't intend to. He explained that the owners pay themselves big salaries and expenses and go out of business, collapse the corporation, and start the whole game all over again. That made no sense to me. The more I thought about it, the madder I got. It was wrong, unfair. I knew there must be thousands of other writers out there just like me, and all they wanted to do was just write songs and get paid. If I set up a company that did that, I was sure all the writers would come to me. So that's what I did. I set up a company and called it Joe Bet, a contraction of my children's names, Joy, Barry, and Terry. Smokey was my first writer. I hadn't been in the publishing business long when my producer's royalty check for Got a Job arrived. Smokey happened to be with me that day, and I couldn't wait to tear open the envelope. When I did, we saw a check for $3.19. You might as well start your own record label, Smokey said. I don't think you could do any worse than this. I agreed. The only hitch was coming up with enough money to put out one record. It wouldn't take a lot, just enough to pay the recording, pressing, and label costs. I already knew what song I wanted to release, Come to Me, which I had written with Marv Johnson, a singer whose rich voice had the ability to deliver the magic. Now all I needed was about $1,000. But hustling around town, I soon discovered it was hard to find anyone to invest in my project. They either wanted too much for too little or had their own financial problems. I turned to my brother Fuller. You know, I think Burberry might be a possibility. Why don't you try that, he suggested. He was referring to our family savings fund, owned by my parents, brothers and sisters, and me. Named after Mother and Pop, Bertha and Barry, it operated much like a credit union. We all contributed $10 a month. If you wanted to borrow from it, you had to have a real good reason. So far, no one had had one good enough. A week later, we all sat around the dining room table at Mother and Pop's house, and I launched into one of the most brilliant sales pitches ever. And remember, I pointed out as I neared my conclusion, my songs have been smashes on Jackie Wilson. This new artist, Marv Johnson, has the makings of a star. Who's to say he won't do twice as good as Jackie? Naturally, I topped everything off by promising to repay the loan with full interest. I will always remember Gwen and Anna getting up, walking around the table saying, "Give him a chance, give him the money." But my sister Esther hadn't bought my pitch, and the decision to give me the loan had to be unanimous. Since Burberry had been Esther's idea, her lack of enthusiasm for my proposal was not good news. "You're 29 years old," Esther said, "and what have you done so far with your life?" I was stunned for a moment because I hadn't realized how old I was. Age was something I was never conscious of before. I had to regroup fast. I attacked. "So what if I'm 29? I could be 39, 49, or 59. What's age got to do with it?" I shouted. "Tomorrow could be a total turnaround. That's what's wrong with people. They give up their dreams too soon. I'm never going to give up mine." Esther stuck to her guns. "That's very nice. But how are you going to pay us back?" I hated it when she said that. So I ignored her and looked at Mother and Pop. While they had been neutral before, their body language told me they were proud of my performance. Mother, in her resolved, quiet way, gave a teeny nod to Gwen and Anna, letting them know she was on their side. Pop and my brothers followed next, then Lucy, and finally Esther gave in. A loan of $800 was voted for unanimously, but not before they made me sign an additional note pledging my future royalties as security. Esther had been tougher than I'd anticipated, but I knew right then, if I ever made any money, she'd be the one I'd get to watch it for me. Smokey and I went to pick up the newly pressed records of Come to Me from the plant in Owasso, Michigan. We had recorded the song just 2 days before at United Sound Studios. It was a wonder Marv Johnson, who sang his heart out on every rehearsal rundown, still had any voice left for the actual recording. Once I had the feeling I wanted down in the studio, I rushed up to the control room where I found that Joe Syracuse, the engineer, had balanced everything smoothly, too smoothly. "Where's the bass?" I screamed. "My drum. Pull up the bass. Pull up the drum. Pull up the group." He did everything I told him. "Where's Marv? You've lost the lead singer," I shouted over the blaring music. "Pulling everything else up, you buried him," he shouted back. "Well, pull him up higher." "I can't." Distortion. "See those needles," he said, pointing to the meters on the console. "They're all in the red." "Okay," I said, "take everything down. We'll start from the beginning." He looked at me like I was crazy. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said. "Why am I listening to you?" I tried to lighten things a bit. The customer's always right, I smiled. He stared at me for a moment, then smiled back, pulling the faders all the way down. It took about 10 takes, but finally I felt I had the sound I needed for a big hit. The name for my first label, Tamla, came by chance. One day, looking through an old Cashbox magazine, I noticed that Tammy by Debbie Reynolds had been the #1 pop record in the country. I knew millions of people were already familiar with that name, so I decided to use it. But when I sent it to Washington to be registered, I found someone else had beat me to it. So I dropped the last 2 letters and added L.A., and it became Tamla. I rushed the 45s to come to me to DJs at WJLB and WCHB, the 2 radio stations in town that played black music. In just a few days, I had cut a record, pressed it, and got it on the air. Come to Me was a hit, and people were calling and telling me so. But what to do next? I had no money. In my original calculations, I hadn't figured what it would cost to press and ship a national release. Then I heard United Artists wanted to buy the master and distribute it nationally. I hopped the plane to New York and made a deal, signing Marv to a long-term contract with me producing the masters for them. No longer considered just a hit songwriter. Now I was a hit producer as well. The second song I attempted to go national with was one Smokey brought over one day, Bad Girl. I know you're going to like this one, he said, handing me a lyric sheet that read, "She's not a bad girl because she made me see what love could be, but she's a bad girl because she wants to be free." I knew what I was hearing was in a class by itself, so simple, so clear, so pure, yet so clever. Then while singing the bridge, he stopped. "I'm having trouble with this part. I need your help." Before, when Smokey had come to me with songs, though I enjoyed working with him, it was still work. Now, I felt honored. Jumping on the piano bench, I helped him with some chords and lyrics. I was crazy about the melody of Bad Girl, but I loved the concept even more. This was the first time I could feel Smokey's true brilliance as a poetic storyteller. "What a great song we wrote," Smokey said. "We wrote? You wrote. I just helped. It's your song," I said. "Oh, no, we wrote it together," Smokey insisted. Less than a week later, I managed to get Bad Girl recorded at United Sound Studios by working a special deal with Joe Syracuse, who let us record in the middle of the night when nobody else was using the studio. The record came out so great, I decided to launch a second label with it. The Tamla name was commercial, but had been more of a gimmick. Now I wanted a name that meant more to me, something that would honor my roots. Because of its thriving car industry, Detroit had long been known as the Motor City. In tribute to the down-home quality of the people I grew up with, I used town instead of city. A contraction of Motor Town gave me the perfect name, Motown. I would later use that name to incorporate my company. After making test pressings on Bad Girl, I again found I could not afford to put it out myself. Too much money had gone into cutting songs and making masters. Once again, my attempt at going national had failed. Fortunately, however, I was able to make a deal with Chess Records in Chicago, not only for Bad Girl, but for 5 other unreleased masters. Bad Girl was a hit, and the Miracles became hotter than ever. Everybody wanted to book them, but Smokey wanted the Apollo, and he got it. I sent the Miracles off to New York and waited anxiously to hear how they were doing. My first hint came when Frank Schiffman, the owner of the Apollo, called, wanting his money back. Smokey later filled us in on the gory details. First, he told us they wouldn't have even made it through rehearsal had it not been for Ray Charles. Those basic little chord sheets we always used were a joke to the house band, he said. They expected full arrangements. Just as the management was about to cancel them, Ray stepped in. "They're just kids starting out," he said. "Let's give them a little help." In no time, Ray learned the song from Smokey by ear and told the musicians how to play it. In spite of Ray Charles' help, the Miracles' performance wasn't much better than their chord sheets. They were still bumping into each other. The audience laughed a lot, especially when Smokey tried to save the show by dancing. Gwen and Anna reminded me this kind of thing wouldn't happen if we had an artist development department. I gave them my usual response. I don't give a damn about none of that stuff. All I care about is getting hit records. With my growing operation, I started looking for a larger place in the summer of 1959. It was my girlfriend and chief assistant, Ray, who found the 2-story house at 2648 West Grand Boulevard. I put a down payment on it and we moved in. A couple of weeks later, nightclub owner George Kelly came by to see our new place. "What are you going to call it?" he asked. "Hitsville," I proclaimed. He laughed. "You're joking." "No, I'm serious. It's a hip name for a factory where hits are going to be built." In no time at all, that house at 2648 West Grand Boulevard took on a whole new life. The garage was turned into a recording studio. The first floor became the lobby, the kitchen the control room, and the living room the bookkeeping department. Upstairs were the living quarters. I shared them with Ray, who I was later married to for 2 years, our new son, Kerry, and Ray's son, Cliff. Above the picture window, stretching from door to door, were big, beautiful letters spelling out, Hitsville USA. My privacy began to disappear as more and more people became drawn to what I was doing. Besides aspiring artists, writers, and producers who had started hanging around, others who had business skills were also looking for ways to get involved. As I had promised myself to do the night my family gave me the Burberry loan, I put Esther in charge of my money. She brought in her husband, George Edwards, a CPA, to do the accounting. Meanwhile, my sister Lucy handled manufacturing, which covered everything from the pressing plants, shipping, billing and collections, to sales, graphics, and liner notes for the album covers. Because of Ray's knowledge of music and lead sheets, I put her in charge of the publishing operation. A songwriter named Janie Bradford was our first receptionist. One day, Janie stopped by the studio while I was trying to finish the song. Janie, a songwriter herself, said the magic words, "What's it about?" "Well," I answered, "when I started writing this song, I was thinking about what most other hit songs were written about. Love. But I didn't want to write about that. Everybody writes about love. I wanted to write about something different. But what?" Then it popped into my head, the most obvious thing of all, the thing I needed most, money. And I'm almost finished. Got one more verse to go. "But won't people think that's all you care about?" Janie said. "So what? Some will be shocked. Some will think it's cute. Some will think it's funny. I think I'll make money." At the piano, I started to play some of the chords, telling her how as a kid I'd heard people say, the best things in life are free, but knowing how much easier it was to say that when you had money, I sarcastically added, "But you can give them to the birds and bees. I need money." She laughed. I loved the fact that she laughed, so I rushed into the next verse singing the song now as I played. "Money don't get everything is true, but what it don't get, I can't use. I need money." Janie was ecstatic. Still laughing, she offhandedly threw in her own line. "Your love give me such a thrill, but your love don't pay my bills. Give me some money, baby." "Great, that's great," I said, continuing to jam on the chorus line. "I'm going to use that." I don't think she realized I was serious until she saw the songwriter's contract. Thinking her verse was the best of all, I gave her 50%. I recorded Money, That's What I Want on Baird Strong. It was one of the first records cut at Hitsville. That session was like one long party.
The best things in life are free, but you can give them to the birds and bees. I need
I no longer had to worry about the cost of the studio. I owned it. This time, nothing was going to stop me from having a national release on my own label. I put the record out in Detroit and sent it to the Washington, Baltimore, and Cleveland, Cincinnati areas. But orders came in so fast from D.C., Cleveland, and Detroit that there was no way I could afford to press enough records to send them around the rest of the country. My sister Gwen had a suggestion. Since a label she'd started with Rokel, Anna Records, had national distribution through Chess, why not put Money on her label? I liked that idea. It was a win-win situation, I thought. But by early 1960, I discovered that I had made more money from those 3 areas where I was working directly with the independent distributors than I did from the entire rest of the country. Big eye-opener. On my next record, I knew I had to go for it by myself, national all the way. A month later, Smokey brought me the record that could do it. Way Over There had great feeling, great melody, and great lyrics, and Smokey sang it as if his life depended on it. Lucy started right away on the distribution, getting a master DJ list from Gwen. Thanks to DJs in Detroit like Franny Kearney, Jolton Joe, and Larry Dixon, and guys in Cleveland and Cincinnati like Ken Hawkins, Eddie O.J., and Jockey Jack Gibson, Way Over There started happening fast, spreading throughout much of the Midwest. I was told if I wanted the East Coast, I had to get Georgie Woods at WDAS, the kingpin in Philadelphia. I did, and 2 days later, Philadelphia ordered 1,000 records. Black radio was everything to people like me. I was no stranger to the power of the disc jockey. These guys were stars. They didn't just spin the records, they provided entertainment, jiving, preaching, teaching, each with his own style. They took us along the road of the incredible changes going on in music and in life. I always get a good feeling when I think back to how they, the jocks in black radio, played my records early on and took so much pride in helping me, a young black cat out of Detroit. Way Over There was going strong. We had sold 60,000 copies. Yet, every time I heard the record, I kept thinking how much better it could be if I only had strings on it. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore and found myself assembling the troops and flying to Universal Studios in Chicago. I wanted that big New York sound, and in my mind, there was no way I could get that in our little studio at Hitsville. On the flight over, I told the Miracles how the Chicago Symphony was going to play the strings on the new version and how the new record was going to be so much better, cleaner, fuller. Once the recording got underway, Smokey became inspired at hearing the difference in the sound quality. And I was convinced that we'd laid down the most beautiful strings I'd ever heard. Ecstatic about the great sound, we switched the records and started shipping the one with the strings. Everybody loved it. Everybody, that is, except the public. The record never sold more than the original 60,000 copies. The first version had an honesty and raw soul. The second was a copy. It was then I began to better appreciate the sound produced by our own little studio. Even though my idea to recut hadn't turned out so well, Way Over There was still a real victory. I had finally gone national. Motown had entered the music scene. William Mickey Stevenson showed up at Hitsville for an audition one day with an official-looking briefcase and a big, easy grin. Sharply dressed, hip, fast-talking, Mickey was street, much more street than I was. I liked him a lot. Then he sang a song. I liked him less. Your singing is okay, I said, but I just don't need another singer right now. What I really need is an A&R director. Can you do that? Do a bear shit in the woods, he said. I don't think Mickey even knew what an A&R man was. I wasn't so sure myself. But I did know A&R stood for artist and repertoire, and that every other record company had one. And I felt whatever it was, Mickey could do it. He had the job. It turned out that while A&R director might mean something different at other record companies, at Motown it meant somebody in charge of all the creative activities of producing a record. It was really with Mickey that I began something that would be unique to my management style. Building the structure around the person rather than the person around the structure. People over structure would continue to dominate throughout the years. Right at the start, Mickey went on the lookout for great musicians, combing even the seediest bars. If they could play, Mickey would bring them in, putting together the greatest house band that anyone could ever want. They called themselves the Funk Brothers, which included two guys I always had to have on my sessions, Benny Benjamin and James Jamerson. What happened after I came out of the studio was as important as what happened in it. It seems as though I spent my life at the mixing board. To get just the right sound, just the right blend, I would mix and then remix. Smokey and I had a running joke over what a mix maniac I was. Often the differences between the various mixes were so subtle, but those subtleties, I felt, could make or break a record. Whether I was cutting a record, mixing it, or listening to someone else's, I tried to be open to anything. I may not have always known what I was looking for exactly, but when I found it, I knew it. Detroit's hottest nightclub, the 20 Grand, was packed. The Miracles were getting ready to perform in the main showroom, and I wanted to check the sound before they went on. Pushing my way through the crowd of excited people, I heard this little voice. "Mr. Gordy, Mr. Gordy." "Yeah," I answered, looking back at a little brown-skinned girl with broad features and big eyes running toward me. "Mr. Gordy," she said, trying to catch her breath. "I've got a song. It's great. It's really good. Can I have an appointment with you?" "Can you sing it?" I yelled, still bobbing and weaving through the openings in the crowd. "Oh, yeah, I can sing it really good." "Well, then sing it," I said. "Now?" "Yeah, right now." She jumped right into the song, singing Bye Bye Baby with vigor and desperation. I loved her soulful, raspy sound. I stopped. "What's your name?" Mary Wells." "Okay, Mary. Meet me at the studio tomorrow." The next day at Hitsville, she said she had written the song for Jackie Wilson, but when I told her she was the only perfect person to sing it, it seems her wildest dreams had come true. I knew how Mary felt because my own dream for a hit factory was quickly taking form. I wanted a place where a kid off the street could walk in one door and unknown and come out another, a recording artist, a star. Not knowing exactly how to run a business, I broke my operation down into 3 functions: create, make, and sell. The create phase, writing, producing, and recording, was really starting to come together as the Hitsville talent pool expanded on a regular basis. The make phase, manufacturing, pressing the records, was the process that Lucy oversaw. It now required a growing support staff to deal with inventories to plants, deliveries to distribution points, and the billing to the distributors. We were doing fine with the create and make phase, but the sell phase, placing records with distributors, getting airplay, marketing, and advertising, was the area I needed to develop. Since our sales department at the time consisted of one guy, me, I knew I needed more help, somebody who could get to the broader market. Building an interracial organization at the time I started Motown was unnatural for misconceptions. A black-owned company with white employees trying to capture the general market? People told me it couldn't be done, but I remembered back to 1947 when Jackie Robinson broke the baseball color barrier and became the first black man to play in the major leagues. His team, the Brooklyn Dodgers, went on to win the pennant that year. Aside from being proud of the way he carried himself in the face of intense bigotry, it made me see that any team that had the guts to hire the best person for the job, no matter what their color, could win. That was my idea when I hired Barney Elis, an Italian, to promote records by black artists to the white pop stations. I knew for anyone to want to buy my records, they first had to hear them. Over the years, Barney would assemble one of the most phenomenal sales teams ever. Around this time, Smokey, who was always running in excited to see me about something, found me in the studio at the piano working on a new tune of my own. This time he wanted help on a song he was writing called Shop Around. As he sang the lyrics, I forgot about whatever I was writing and told him what he was singing was going to be the Miracles' next big hit. Up until then, Smokey and I had written everything together, but on each song, I was doing less and less. Finally, on this record, I quietly took my name off the label, so when it was released, he would realize he had come into his own as a songwriter. He didn't need me or anybody else. But when Smokey found out, he was furious, and without telling me, he made Lucy's label copy people put it back on. When the record came out, I was the one surprised. But every time I heard it on the radio, I got sick. Too slow, not enough life. I was mad at myself for ever letting it be released. I thought back to how disastrous my recutting way over there had been, but to let that mistake keep me from doing what I now thought was right would be an even bigger mistake. I called Smokey. "Man, we've got to cut the song again," I said. "Who is this?" "Me, Barry. We've got to do it again, man." "It's 3 o'clock in the morning." "Oh? You busy or something?" I asked. "No, man," he said. "I was just sitting here waiting for your call." An hour or so later, he had the musicians and the other Miracles at the studio. The piano player didn't show up, so I played it myself. We recut the new version with more life and a faster beat. Within a few months, the new Shop Around had gone to #1 R&B and #2 on the pop charts. our first million seller. After the success of Shop Around, I needed to be in about 10 places at once. I might have Mary Wells at the Warfield Theater, Baird Strong at the Royal Blue Nightclub, Marv Johnson at the Armory in Flint, Michigan, and the Miracles off to Philadelphia to appear on Dick Clark's American Bandstand. And now that the artist's own cycles of success were kicking in, it brought on a whole new set of responsibilities for me. They looked to me for advice, not only from a creative standpoint, but a business and personal one as well. In order for me to continue focusing on creative activities and not get too sidetracked by problems, I created an artist management company, naming it International Talent Management, Inc. The purpose of ITME, as we called it, was to act as personal manager to the artist. They did everything from getting them gigs, providing career guidance, and negotiating with booking agents to making sure they paid their taxes. My sister Esther, part mother hen and part general, was the perfect person to run it. Hitsville was jumping. It was December of 1960, and we were having our first annual Christmas party. Everybody was there. In the control room where I was laughing it up with Mickey Stevenson and Smokey, Gwen found me. "Barry, you've got to hear this guy. He's great," she said, pointing through the thick glass windows that separated the control room from the studio. Looking out, I saw this boyish, handsome guy. Sitting at the piano, gracefully stroking the keys in an almost melancholy fashion, he appeared to be deep in thought. "That's Marvin Gaye," she said. "He's been singing with Harvey and the Moonglows, but wants to go solo." There was something real special about the image this guy projected that made me want to hear what he was playing. I wandered into the studio, sitting down next to him at the piano bench. He knew who I was, but he was cool, real cool. He kept on playing without looking in my direction. Over the party noise, I could hear the soft, jazzy melodies he was weaving. There was a warmth and a sadness in the music that made me feel good. "Barry Gordy," he said softly. "How you doing, man?" "Fine. I heard you're a really good singer," I said. "I'm okay." "Well, how about doing something for me?" Continuing to play, he began to sing a warm, jazzy rendition of a standard, Mr. Sandman. His voice was pure, mellow, soulful, and honest. I knew right then I wanted to work with him. Something about him was different, deep, intense. I told Marvin that he had something real special. "You really think so?" he said. "Definitely." "What? What do you think it is?" he asked. I wanted to tell him something, but I wasn't quite sure myself. It tickled me that here I was, the king of the party, and he had me on the defensive in our very first meeting. "I don't know," I said, "but maybe I'll tell you later." I met artists in so many different ways. About 6 months before, I had been passing through the lobby when producer Robert Bateman was auditioning 4 girls, singing an a cappella version of the Drifters' "There Goes My Baby." The whiny voice of the girl singing lead caught my attention. She was on the skinny side with great big eyes and a lot of self-confidence. Just as they finished the song, I stopped. "Would you sing that again?" I asked, motioning to the lead singer with my hand. "Sure," she said, smiling in a bashful way. As I turned away, I heard her whisper to the others, "That's Barry Gordy." The 4 of them, Diane Ross, Mary Wilson, Florence Ballard, and Betty McGlown, started the song again. When they finished the song, they could see I was highly impressed and wanted to know right away if I was going to sign them to a recording contract. When I found out they were seniors in high school, I told them to come back and see me when they graduated. Despite their disappointment, almost every day after school, they showed up at Hitsville, making friends with producers and trying to get gigs singing background for other artists. Their determination paid off. In January of 1961, they were signed to Motown. They became a trio after Barbara Martin, who had replaced Betty McGlown, left. Before then, they had been singing under the name of the Primettes, a sister group to the Primes, who would later become the Temptations. When I told them I thought they needed a new name, they all came up with ideas. But Florence had the name I liked best, the Supremes. They were the sweethearts of Hitsville. Mary was probably the most popular with the guys. Flo was sarcastic from the start. Her dry humor kept us laughing all the time. Diane had an innocent manner that let her get away with almost anything. Long before she was a star, There was a drive in her that could not be denied. Nor could her appeal, which she used to full advantage. I soon realized her name needed more sparkle. Diane seemed a little passive for what I saw in her. Diana, that was a star's name. The Temptations' five-man lineup was made up of members of two local groups. From the distance came Otis Williams, Melvin Franklin, and Al Bryant, shortly thereafter replaced by David Ruffin. Paul Williams and Eddie Kendricks came from the primes. The Temps epitomized tall, dark, and handsome, and each could sing lead. Together they created some of the greatest sounds I'd ever heard. Not too long after the Temps were signed, I was eating breakfast in my office when Mickey Stevenson burst in. "BG, you've got to come hear this little kid now." I hurried down to the studio and found the young blind kid Ronnie White from the Miracles had brought in for us to hear. He was singing, playing the bongos and drums and blowing on a harmonica. Something about him was infectious. Signed as Stephen Hardaway Judkins, he was only 11, but people were already telling me he could be another Ray Charles. I don't really remember it, but Esther told me, while watching Stevie in the studio one day, I remarked, "What a wonder," and the name stuck. Meanwhile, the success of Shop Around had sent shockwaves of enthusiasm through the whole company. Up until now, I had been the only hit producer. But just as I realized I couldn't manage all the artists myself, I knew I couldn't produce them all either. I knew competition could be a very effective tool in getting results, so I made it clear that it was open season for anyone who felt creatively inclined to compete with me to get the next big hit. Smokey jumped on the challenge immediately, telling me what great ideas he had had for Mary Wells. I had planned on continuing to produce her myself, but told him to take his best shot. Over the next few months, everybody started getting into the act. Clarence Paul, Mickey's A&R assistant, took Stevie under his wing. Mickey and my brother George were working on some ideas for Marvin Gaye, and I set out to get that first hit on both the Supremes and the Temptations. In order to decide which records were the best, I set up quality control, a system I had seen at Lincoln Mercury. The best records were selected from QC and brought into our product evaluation meetings, which were held every Friday morning. These meetings were considered my meetings. They were exciting and the lifeblood of our operation. Producers would busy themselves all week, mixing, mastering, overdubbing, bragging, campaigning, spying on each other, and even trying to bribe Billie Jean Brown, the head of quality control, who approved the list of what was going to be brought into the meeting. Everybody had a vote in deciding what would be the next release. My three main rules for these meetings were: no producer could vote on his own record, only I could overrule a majority vote, and anyone over 5 minutes late would be locked out. These rules were strictly enforced. There were many people locked out, but the funniest I remember was the day Smokey was pounding on the door, crying and begging to be let in. Being locked out of that meeting was like being locked out of your own home. Of course, I relented and let him in. I couldn't help myself. It was Smokey. Another thing I was very serious about was people having the freedom to express their honest opinions openly at these meetings, without fear of reprisal. To me, that was critical to the process. Each time a record made it through one of these meetings and became a hit, we got a little bit bigger. In those days, it was common knowledge that the independent distributors would only pay you for your last hit if you had another one coming up. Without the leverage of another hit to collect our money, we couldn't pay our suppliers, who might then cut us off, putting us out of business. The summer of 1961, I was nervous. In that past year, we had released about 20 records, many of which I thought should have been bigger hits than they were. And I still hadn't gotten paid all the money for my first big hit, Shop Around. Lucy had pushed hard for collections, but there was only so much she could do. We needed a new big hit. At the next Friday meeting, I found one. It was called Please, Mr. Postman, a cute, catchy little tune by a new group called the Marvelettes: Gladys Horton, Georgiana Tillman, Wanda Young, Catherine Anderson, and Juanita Coward. The record was produced by a new team, Brian Holland and Robert Bateman, under the name Brian Burt. It was a bouncy track with a clever tagline that had Gladys Horton, the lead singer, begging the postman to deliver the letter, the sooner the better. Please, Mr. Postman, became our second million seller and our first #1 pop hit. All those distributors who hadn't had the money to pay us before, now, all of a sudden, had it. It became clear to me that my create, make, and sell slogan had to be revised. We had to focus more on getting our money, collecting. Because I felt that create and make were pretty close to the same thing, and because I liked the rhythm of saying things in threes, I dropped the make and changed the slogan to create, sell, and collect. I then decided to add 3 more words to complete the cycle: pay, save, and reinvest. What I hoped to do was pay the bills, save a little money, then reinvest what was left back into the business. But at that time, overloaded with bills, royalties, and taxes, my focus had to be on paying, and I needed someone new to handle that. One of the luckiest days of my life was when I met the Novak brothers. Together, Harold and Sidney kept watch on the company's financial operation, keeping it clean, solid. Whenever there were challenges from anyone, our clean financial records backed up our claims. Later, when there would be tax problems or complaints that artists weren't being paid properly, the IRS or other auditors would swarm into our offices like vultures. But after looking at our books, they would usually leave meekly, and in some cases, even apologize. As other independent record companies were failing, we were thriving. I am often asked, how did you do it? How did you make it work at a time when so many barriers existed for black people in black music? There are many answers to those questions, but at the base of them is atmosphere. Hitsville had an atmosphere that allowed people to experiment creatively and gave them the courage not to be afraid to make mistakes. It was an atmosphere that made you feel no matter how high your goals, they were reachable, no matter who you were. Motown was the family, right from the beginning. We did everything together. We shot pool, played ping pong, had late-night poker games, and impromptu football matches on the front lawn. We even had a bowling team. In many ways, Hitsville was like growing up in the Gordy family. Fierce closeness and fierce competition and constant collaboration. Artists sang background in each other's sessions, or played the tambourine or clapped their hands. Any employee who could carry a tune or keep a beat was used. Each person, whether directly in the creative process or behind the scenes, somehow affected the mix. The love we felt for each other at Hitsville is the most undisputed truth about our music. I sometimes refer to our sound as a combination of rats, roaches, soul, guts, and love. Because of our closeness, no matter what would happen over the course of the next 30 years, I would always love every person who was a part of this story. They're all in my blood, and I in theirs. They cannot not love me. I cannot not love them. I know it. They know it. And there's nothing anybody can do about it. I had always figured that less than 1% of the people in all the world ever reach their full potential. Seeing that potential in others, I realized that by helping them reach theirs, maybe I could reach mine. My assembly line dream continued to build as we purchased several adjacent buildings on West Grand Boulevard, expanding our territory, adding new departments. These included artist development that Gwen and Anna had urged me to have, where artists could take classes in choreography, harmony, poise, wardrobe, and grooming. By the fall of 1963, we increased our visibility in Europe when we signed an international distribution deal with EMI. We also set up our own publishing operation throughout Europe. Our international success proved to me that people have so much in common. It's just a matter of communication. Communication breeds understanding, and understanding breeds everything else. Words, our primary form of communication, often mean different things to different people. That's why I've always been more concerned about what people mean rather than what they say. Sometimes the most innocent words can lead to big trouble. I made the horrible mistake one day of calling Marvin Gaye boy. I'll never forget that day because it was the same day President Kennedy was killed. Friday, November 22nd, 1963. Not long after the last of the stragglers had left our Friday morning meeting, Marvin came into my office. I was down in the sales department, BG, and they're bullshitting, man. They're supposed to be getting more airplay on my record, but all they're pushing is Martha and the Vandellas and the Miracles. Can I Get a Witness is just barely breaking the top 30, man. and it's been out for over 2 months. Marvin had said, I've told you, you can't be running into the sales department screaming at those guys. I reminded him of everything sales was accomplishing for him. He didn't care. I don't like the way they talk to me, he said. So I set up a meeting for later that day with him, Harvey Fuqua, Marvin's close friend, and Phil Jones from the sales department. Marvin left my office satisfied. Then somebody, I don't remember who, ran in and said the president had been shot. Shortly after that, the news came back that he was dead. Stunned, I sat in my office as calls came in from family and friends to find out if I knew. Marvin called to see if I still wanted to have the meeting. I said yes. The meeting started off on a sad note, but soon grew into a heated argument between Marvin and Phil. Harvey, who knew a lot about the record business, joined me in trying to convince Marvin we were all on his side. Marvin began to understand. As the meeting was coming to an end, I tied things up by saying, so Marvin, don't be running into the sales department cussing them out. Be a good boy, okay? Boy, Marvin said, jumping to his feet. CBG, you think I'm a boy just like the white man. Boy is not a bad word, Marvin, I said. My father calls me boy. I call my sons boy. It's not what a person says, it's what they mean. Marvin started pounding my desk. See, that's how you do it, man. Talking to you is ridiculous. You start switching stuff around and shit. Before I knew it, I had backhanded the top of my desk, scattering everything in arm's reach to the floor. I jumped up. What the hell are you talking about, man? I said, rushing over to stand face to face with Marvin. Don't you realize the president was killed today? Don't you understand that I just stayed here for a meeting with you to solve a problem because I care about how you feel? How about how I feel? I stormed out of my office, hurried down the stairs and out into the street, not knowing where I was going. The next day, Marvin told me he did understand. I was deeply saddened by the death of John Kennedy. I believed him to be a great president who had embraced and created hope for black people in a way that had not been felt in modern times. A feeling of loss and shock hung over everything in those months of late 1963 and early 1964. Then in March came a joyful personal event when the beautiful Margaret Norton and I had a son. I named him Kennedy William Gordy in honor of President Kennedy and William Smokey Robinson.
Another day, another night, I long to hold you tight, 'cause I'm so lonely. Baby, I need your loving. Got to have all.
Hit fever was catching the spring of 1964. What we were hearing in those Friday morning meetings was so exciting. It was often standing room only in my office. One of the greatest songs to explode off that turntable was an acetate of the first production we heard on the Four Tops. Levi Stubbs, Lawrence Payton, Abdul Duke Fakir, and Ronaldo Obi Benson were seasoned veterans before coming to Motown. I felt so fortunate to have them on our roster. The instant I heard Baby I Need Your Lovin', with rhythm, horns, and finger snaps, Three Tops wailing away on the intro, and Levi going right for our hearts, I knew it was a winner, and my mind was buzzing with possibilities for their future before the song was even over. The songwriting producing team, Eddie and Brian Howland and Lamont Dozier, known as HDH, had given the Four Tops a great start. Talk also centered around Mary Wells, our biggest hit maker, who had been going strong ever since her first record, Bye Bye Baby. It had been Smokey's poetic genius teamed with her unique talent that started a romp through the charts, culminating with the record Smokey had boasted would go to #1 pop, My Guy, which it did in May of 1964. Mary Wells was hot. On stage, her attitude commanded attention. She wore long, glamorous gowns and stylish wigs, from black bouffants to blonde ponytails. Mary had become the big female star I had always wanted. All the producers wanted to record anything on her. They didn't give a damn what it was, whether it was an A-side, a B-side, or just a tune in one of her albums. They all knew it would make money. But all of a sudden, no one was able to get in touch with Mary. Of all the people to be having trouble with at this time, it had to be my biggest star, the person responsible for selling the most records. When I was finally able to get Mary on the phone, I noticed a difference in her voice. I told her I wanted to meet with her, and she agreed, but said she didn't want to leave her house. I told her I'd be over. "Have a seat," Mary said when I arrived. Her strangely cool attitude was obvious as she led me into her living room. I asked her why she hadn't been to the studio lately. She told me she hadn't been feeling too well. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me, "Nothing much." "Well, Mary," I said, "if you're unhappy about something, just let me know what it is so I can do something about it." Silence. She looked as though she almost felt sorry for me. A bad sign. I just sat awkwardly, trying to find something funny to say or hoping she might say something light or amusing to prove my thoughts wrong and brighten the mood. I must admit at this point, I probably would have laughed at anything she said. "Mr. Gordy, I think you should talk to my lawyer." I didn't laugh. I did smile, however, probably out of some natural instinct as a poker player. Still smiling, I bid her goodbye, telling her I'd be happy to meet with her lawyer. I lied. The next day, Mary's attorney, a Mr. Lewis Harris from New York, came into my office and got right to the point. He told me Mary had been 21 for a few months now and was disaffirming all her contracts with Motown. When I wanted to know why, he told me she could get a better deal elsewhere. "There's a lot more value here than you can see," I told him, "and money is only a part of it. Let me show you the whole picture." First, I took him to the writers' and producers' rooms, then the studio, the management operation, and the promotion and sales departments. I then took him over to artist development. Even before the tour was over, Mr. Harris was full of praise. "Mr. Gordy," he said, "I have never seen a company that does this much for any artist." He was convinced there was no place in the world for Mary but Motown and assured me he would tell her just that. He called me the next day and told me he had been fired. And then he went on to give me a piece of advice. "You'd be much better off," he said, "spending half of the time doing what you do for the artist and the other half telling them what you're doing." That was good advice, but I didn't take it. I knew if I spent only half my time doing for them, they would only go half as far. After many months of negotiating with Mary's new attorneys, she left Motown. She went on to record for 20th Century Fox Records, Atco, Jubilee, Reprise, and Epic Records. But she'll always be remembered as a Motowner for her song, "My Guy." She had helped to write an exciting chapter in our history and would always be special to me for that. But at the time, I was hurt. I had lost the female star I wanted so much to have. Part 3. I Hear a Symphony. With Mary Wells leaving, a sullen air had settled over Hitsville. We all took it hard, but Smokey took it the worst. Smokey had had a lock on Mary's productions. Now he would have to compete like everybody else to get a record out on other artists coming up. It was a little after 11 o'clock in early June of '64. We had just finished another Friday morning meeting where, as usual, a group of us had battled hard over which records would be the next releases. My sister Esther rushed into my office. "Dick Clark's office just called," she said. Dick's name was Magic. Our attention was glued on Esther's mouth. "They want Brenda Holloway on Caravan of Stars," she said. "Great," Smokey shouted. We all knew how important Caravan of Stars was. Dick was a great promoter, taking the hottest acts on tour across the country, exposing them to pop audiences. It was like the ultimate record hop. Dick and his TV show, American Bandstand, had been responsible for building many artists from nothing to superstardom. With her hit, Every Little Bit Hurts, Brenda Holloway was so hot that not only did Dick Clark want her on the Caravan of Stars, but she would later open for the Beatles on their North American tour. In fact, most of our artists were being booked and promoted throughout the country and on television. with acts like the Miracles, Martha and the Vandellas, the Temptations, the Marvelettes, Marvin Gaye, and Little Stevie Wonder all having top hits on the charts. Esther and the other managers at ITME had no trouble keeping them busy. The one act who didn't have the hit power yet and who needed an extra push was the Supremes. "Can you get the Supremes on that same show?" I asked. "It would be great exposure for their new record." "I'm way ahead of you," Esther responded. "They don't want them. They're not big enough. Where Did Our Love Go could be an out-and-out smash. We need Dick Clark for the white people. I gotta have that tour." "I tried," Esther said. "They're already way over budget." "Budget? To hell with budget," I said. "I'll pay them if I have to." I was screaming by this time. "You've got to try again." I watched Esther as she left. She knew if it worked, she'd be a hero. A short time later, she reappeared in my doorway. "It's done," she said. "You mean you got 'em on?" I was so excited. "Sure did. It's done." When Esther got back to me with the details of the Supremes deal, I realized she had taken me literally when I said I'd pay them if I had to. She had agreed to a deal where Dick Clark would only pay the Supremes $600 a week to go on a 36-day tour with the Caravan. Diana's mother went along as chaperone, which meant that the money would have to be split 4 ways. When Diana, Mary, and Florence left on that tour, they were on the bottom of the bill of 17 acts. Then Where Did Our Love Go began to move up the charts. The Dick Clark people had to reprint the poster over and over again, moving the Supremes further up toward the top. At the end of July, the girls came rolling back into town as stars, with their record on the way to #1. By late summer of 1964, we were beginning to explode. Hitsville shook with excitement as more and more people's dreams were coming true. Shimmering Cadillacs lined West Grand Boulevard in front of our door. No one could wait to get to work in the morning, and everybody hated to leave at night. Inside in every corner and cubbyhole, hits were being made. That summer, the song that seemed to tie everything together for me was Martha and the Vandellas' Dancing in the Streets. It was written by Mickey Stevenson, Marvin Gaye, and Ivy Jo Hunter, produced by Mickey. Paul Reiser, one of Motown's all-time great arrangers who brilliantly merged classical traditions into Motown funk, was the one who created the brilliant horn and rhythm arrangements on Dancing in the Streets. My goal to hook people in the first 20 seconds was never accomplished better. The intro was a hit before Martha Reeves even opened her mouth, and when she did, it was devastating. America wasn't the only place people were dancing in the streets. One day I got a call from a man in the London office of the Beatles' manager, Brian Epstein, telling me the Beatles wanted to record 3 of our songs for their next album, entitled The Beatles' Second Album. The songs were Money, That's What I Want, You Really Got a Hold on Me, and Please Mr. Postman. Only a few months before, I had met Epstein when he paid a visit to Hitsville and expressed his and the Beatles' excitement about the Motown sound, telling us of the great influence it had had on them. Now, as the man from his office explained, they wanted to record our songs, but wanted a discount rate on the publishing royalty. Rather than pay us the standard 2 cents per song, they only wanted to pay 1.50 cents. I told the man how thrilled I was with the prospect of the Beatles doing our songs, but I didn't want to give a rate. He said that was customary in the business, and he was demanding it. I said no. The very next morning, the same man called again. He said they were sticking firm to their demand, and I had until 12 o'clock noon that same day to wire them an answer. I looked at the clock. It was already 11:30. "Fine," I said, hanging up the phone. I quickly called in anybody I could find to help me with this heavy decision. Smokey, my brother Robert, my sister Lucy, Billie Jean, and Barney all came to my office. Once I told them the story, everybody had an opinion, all talking at the same time. Billie Jean, "Don't do it." Robert, "What if they're making up their minds at this very moment as to what's going on the album? You could lose a fortune." Barney, "Do it. It's done all the time." Lucy, special rates aren't that unusual. Other publishers do it, especially if they do more than a couple of songs. Barney, we're talking about big bucks. They might sell 10 million. Me, Brian Epstein, would never not use a great song just to save a half a cent. No way. I'm holding out. And I did. Until about 2 minutes to 12, when I rushed off a wire to England, agreeing to their demand of the cent-and-a-half rate. Everybody was jubilant that I had given in, including me. Until about 2 o'clock that same day when we got the news. Capitol Records had the albums in stock at their distributors and were at that very moment sending them out to radio stations and stores. The Beatles' new album with our 3 songs on it had already been recorded, mixed, mastered, pressed, and shipped. I had lost the game of chicken. And though they really got me, I'd probably make that same decision again today. I have learned that you should never out-negotiate yourself. A part of something is always better than all of nothing. The Supreme's second single, Baby Love, was our first record to go to #1 in the UK. Back home, it was the Supreme's invasion. They were everywhere. Jet and Ebony magazine were the first to give them covers. Then the white magazines like Look and Time started coming out with covers and articles as well. One thing that really impressed me was the way the Supremes could do standards and Broadway tunes like Put on a Happy Face and pure 3-part harmony. It was common knowledge that in order to be booked in the major clubs, you first had to make it at the Copacabana in New York. The Copa was home to superstar entertainers like Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett, and Sammy Davis Jr. You had to be a seasoned, established act or the Copa was not interested. Even though the public only wanted top 40 hits from Motown artists, I knew those standards were the key to taking our people to the top nightclubs around the country. And I knew the Supremes could lead the way, if I could just get them exposed. Thankfully, Gary Smith, the producer of the TV show Hullabaloo, told me the Supremes could do You're Nobody Till Somebody Loves You on their show. This opportunity was critical to me. I had visions of Motown songs on Broadway and movies, clubs everywhere. Not only could this take the Supremes to the next level, but if done right, it could break down other stereotypical barriers in the whole world of entertainment. The timing could have not been better, as our first International Motown Review was about to kick off in London and proceed on a European tour. In addition to the Supremes, the review lineup included the Temps, the Miracles, Martha and the Vandellas, Lil Stevie Wonder, the Earl Van Dyke Sextet, and musical arranger, conductor, and trumpet player, Gil Askey. When we touched down at London's Heathrow Airport, we were greeted by cheering fans holding banners that read, "Welcome to the UK, and we love Tamla Motown." Our earliest airplay had come from Radio Veronica and Radio Caroline, pirate ships anchored a few miles off the coast of England and Holland. Now we were being heard on the BBC, Radio Free Europe, and the Voice of America, even in countries behind the Iron Curtain. Many not only loved the artist, but followed the writers and producers as well. London was a whirlwind, doing promotions, engagements, and taping the TV special The Sound of Motown. Our second stop after London was Manchester, where we were doing 2 shows a night. Now was the time to start working on You're Nobody Till Somebody Loves You. At the opening show, the Supremes were great on their first 2 numbers. Then they went into You're Nobody Till Somebody Loves You. The crowd did not recognize the song, much less understand Gil Askey's unique jazz arrangement. The girls struggled to make it work. It didn't, but I was delighted. I had a plan. After the show, I dashed backstage to tell everybody how great they were and give them my notes. They all seemed in high spirits, but not Diana. Seething, she said in a low whisper, "Can I see you alone?" Of course. Once outside the dressing room, she exploded. "They hate the song, and so do I. I'm not doing it anymore." I stood there shocked. I knew how much she hated dying in front of any audience. She was a real star. But when she said she was not doing it anymore, I was devastated. She had never said anything like that to me before. "Look," I told her, "those are just a few people out there. I'm talking about TV and over 40 million people. This song could open the door to everything we wanted. I'm not doing it, she said. I'm not ruining my career for you or nobody. Okay, I said. I tell you what. Make up your mind who you want to satisfy. It's either me or them. It's your decision. Then I turned and left. As I walked to my seat, my heart was sinking into my stomach. I had given her an ultimatum, and now I was locked into it. Insane. This might just be my last show with the Supremes. What was happening inside me was a power struggle between the effect Diana had on me and my need to be in charge. I felt if I backed down now, I would never be able to direct the group properly in the future. But why did I have to give her an ultimatum? Maybe I overreacted. I slumped into my seat, waiting for the second show to begin. When the Supremes finally came out with their usual opening number, I was a knotted ball of tension. When they came to the part of the show where they were supposed to do You're Nobody Till Somebody Loves You, they skipped it. My heart sank to my knees. I began to think of my life without the Supremes. What would I do? Retract the ultimatum? No, never. Leave the tour and go back to Detroit? Concentrate on someone else? Quit the business? Nothing made any sense. Each time the Supremes came to a new song, I was praying for a miracle, but nothing. When it got to their last songs, my heart lay busted on the floor. I was numb. Then I heard the band playing the intro to You're Nobody Till Somebody Loves You. Was I dreaming? When Diana started to sing those words, it almost brought tears to my eyes. I wanted to jump for joy. I had gambled once again and won, not only for myself, but for the Supremes, who I wanted to be the biggest female singing group in the history of the world. When I saw Diana after the show, I told her how happy I was she had done the song. She smiled. I still don't like it, but... She paused, glancing at me. I did it for you. Then she walked away. Diana meant more to me than she could ever imagine. It is absolutely true that at one time I was obsessed with her. In the heyday of the Supremes, I saw the butterfly emerge from the cocoon, and I was dazzled. She was magic, and she was mine. Diana was willing to let me make her star, and I knew she had the talent, drive, and stamina to go the distance. It was, in retrospect, a perfect arrangement, and as long as we were a team, we were invincible. We treated setbacks the same as we treated success. They were both opportunities. I loved her because she gave everything to our mission. She had a willingness to work like a maniac to get it right. All of a sudden, I wasn't the only perfectionist. I had a wonderful counterpart, and she wanted what I wanted, and so we set off to get it, and we did. And along with all that getting, we got each other, the good, the bad, and finally, the big goodbye. We did fall for each other in a way that is much more complicated than most relationships. How did it happen? People are always asking me that. After Manchester, the Supremes sang You're Nobody Till Somebody Loves You at each performance, and audiences began to like it more and more. I was no longer involved with Margaret Norton, and each time I thought about Manchester, I realized how much Diana meant to me. I was madly in love. I think she knew it. When our tour ended in Paris, Diana said to me, "Black, why don't we stay a couple of days after the others leave?" Long before Black was beautiful, I started calling Diana that as an affectionate nickname. She started calling me Black as well. Ever since that experience with Marvin, when I called him boy, I have been taking so-called negative words and using them in positive ways. A word can mean anything you want it to mean, and in Diana's and my case, Black meant pride, love, and affection. When she said that, I was rocketed off my feet. April in Paris, alone, with Diana, phenomenal. And it was phenomenal. That was the real beginning of our great love affair.
You've given me a true love, and every day I thank you, love, for a feeling that's so new, so inviting, so exciting. Whenever you're near, I hear a symphony, a tender melody, pulling me closer, closer to your arms.
But as strong as our romantic involvement became, we vowed not to let it or anything else take the focus off her career and my vision. When the Supremes returned from the European tour, they did indeed perform You're Nobody Till Somebody Loves You on Hullabaloo, reaching millions of TV viewers. Then came another big break, that special club booking that had been eluding us for so long, the Copa. Knowing what a major launching pad his club was, Jules Patel made us sign what many considered a slave contract, where we'd appear for 2 or 3 week periods, 7 days a week, 2 shows a night, for less than $3,000 a week. This was not a problem for me. I was always willing to lose money if it meant building stars. Rehearsing by day, performing at night, we created, shaped, improved, and enhanced every possible detail of the show. Getting close to our July 29th opening, we prepared to move from the Riptide Club in New Jersey, where we were breaking in the show, to the Copacabana in New York City. We were ready. Then I got a call from home. My sister Lucy was seriously ill. I flew back to Detroit. At the hospital, my family told me Lucy had had a cerebral hemorrhage and needed surgery. When I went in to see her, she said she wanted me to be the one to make her medical decisions. The first thing I wanted was a second opinion. Her doctor reluctantly agreed to bring in another specialist. But the day before her operation was scheduled, I was told this second specialist had been called out of town. I wanted to stop the operation, but postponing it, I was told, would be taking a dangerous chance with Lucy's life. Against my better judgment, I gave permission to go ahead. In the waiting room, I couldn't get out of my mind how much Lucy had sacrificed to help me make Motown a success, how much she had trusted me. After long, agonizing hours, the doctor came in to address the family. He said, in essence, that the operation was a success, but that the patient had died. The doctor would go on to other patients, living his life with a clear conscience, but I would have to go on living mine with guilt, all because I had not followed my own instincts. Never again would I put myself in the position to feel this kind of guilt. Maybe sadness, disappointment, or even anger, but never guilt. I would never again let anyone talk me out of doing something I felt was right. Lucy's funeral was held the same day as the opening at the Copa. After the burial service, most of the family flew into New York for the show. We dedicated the performance, and later an album, to the loving memory of Lucy Gordy Wakefield. Shortly after the Copa, the most exclusive clubs in the country started booking the Supremes. The Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas signed them for a year in advance, sight unseen. The best nightclubs opened up for other Motown acts as well. Martha and Vandellas had a sensational run at the Copa, where the Temptations had also been a hit. The Four Tops were standing room only at the Latin Casino, and Stevie Wonder was getting standing ovations at the Eden Rock Hotel in Miami. When I look back at these years from 1965 to 1968, it seems we could do no wrong. Motown's stream of hits was endless. The whole world was fast becoming aware of our overall success, our artists, our songs, our sound. I was being called the star maker, the magic man. During that time in Hitsville, a battle for another kind of supremacy continued. For our first 5 years, the strongest thread in our musical tapestry had been sewn by Smokey, with his clever, poetic lines pushing the Miracles, Mary Wells, and the Temps to the top. Now the texture was being dominated by Hollandosia Holland's simple yet driving melodic overtures. When they gave Marvin another hit with How Sweet It Is to Be Loved by You, Smokey answered with My Girl on the Temptations, their first #1 record. HDH then hit again on Martha and Vandellas with Nowhere to Run. Smokey came back with one of the sexiest records of his career, Ooh Baby Baby, on the Miracles. Smokey had had a lock on the Temptations since their very first hit, The Way You Do the Things You Do. After about 3 years, he did Get Ready. It went to number 1 on the R&B charts, but couldn't get past number 29 pop. A crack in Smokey's armor. That was all Norman Whitfield needed. At the Friday meeting, Norman said confidently, as we listened to his new production on the Temps, Ain't Too Proud to Beg. David Ruffin's voice came jumping off that record, begging like I've never heard anyone beg before. With that song, Norman Whitfield snatched the Temptations right out of Smokey's pocket and began a reign with them that would last around 10 years. When I think of 2 young songwriters who came to us from New York around this same time, one word comes to mind: talented. Nick Ashford and Valerie Simpson wrote and or produced such hits as Ain't No Mountain High Enough, Your Precious Love, and one of my all-time favorites, You're All I Need to Get By, for Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell. They added a sophisticated and dramatic element to our overall sound. I was excited that hits were coming fast on a lot of our artists, but I was worried about little Stevie Wonder. He hadn't had a hit since his number 1 record, Fingertips, a few years before. Now he was an adolescent and his voice was beginning to change, and we were trying to get a hit on him before that happened. We were too late. It did change, but for the better. And soon he was back on the charts with Uptight, Everything's All Right. His voice ultimately became a controlled, powerful, versatile instrument. Ron Miller, a white songwriter from Chicago, wrote songs that sounded like a combination of show tunes and blues. They felt like old standards, and I wanted people to think they were. Now I had a problem. I had to come up with a new company and a name that would make the songs seem like they had been around for ages. I went through the phone book looking for names. 2 separate names caught my eye. One was Stein, and the other was Van Stock. I put them together, Stein and Van Stock. It sounded old-line, classy, and Jewish. Now I had 2 publishing companies, Joe Bett for my Motown-type songs and Stein and Van Stock for my standard-type songs. When Ron's song For Once in My Life was released on Tony Bennett, I read a review in Billboard calling it a great revival of an old classic from Stein and Van Stock Publishing. I was thrilled. An old classic. After Tony's record was a hit, we recorded a hipper, faster version on Stevie Wonder that went straight to the top of the charts. Everyone started recording and performing it, from Jackie Wilson to Jim Nabors to Frank Sinatra. For Once in My Life became a genuine standard. Shelley Berger, who would become indispensable in managing many Motown stars, was amused when he first came to the company and received the latest memo I had issued. We will release nothing less than top 10 product on any artist. And because the Supreme's worldwide acceptance is greater than the others, on them we will release only number 1 records. Is he kidding? Shelley laughed to others. What does he think this is, the Ford Motor Company? We will only manufacture red cars? I had been on the warpath when I circulated that memo. I was shooting for the top. I had no idea we'd actually do it. On the Supremes we had You Can't Hurry Love, You Keep Me Hanging On, Love Is Here and Now You're Gone, and The Happening. All made it. Number 1 records. We dangerous, I remember saying to Brian Howland one day. We were dangerous. Sometimes even to ourselves. Those were the days of the killer poker parties. When our royalty checks came, a group of us that included Mickey Stevenson, Harvey Fuqua, Johnny Bristow, Eddie and Brian Holland, Ron Miller, and myself would get together for a game at one of our homes, which for most of us were new purchases. What a sight. The table piled high with thousands, and everyone concentrating, holding their cards close to their chests. We hardcore players could have written a book on the art of bluffing. Me, I played it very deadpan, strategic, subtly trying to give the wrong clues. Eddie and Bryant were masters of the poker face, whereas the suave Harvey kept a gentlemanly smile on his face the whole time. Johnny, Ron, and especially Mickey were a lot more dramatic. No matter what their cards were, they took on the attitude of sharks circling. And then there was Smokey. He always did the wrong things at the wrong time. He loved poker, but poker didn't love him. He would gamble and lose thousands. I had to borrow him from the game many times. But sometimes when he'd show up and hang around, begging to get in, It was hard to say no. One night he pulled out a fat roll of $100 bills. "Have a seat, Smoke," Mickey said, rubbing his hands. "Smokey's barred," I smiled. "You know he's a patsy." Mickey laughed. "BG called you a patsy, man. I know you ain't gonna let him get away with that." "That's ridiculous," Smokey said. "It's my money. If I want to play, I can play." "You're the one who's ridiculous," I said. "But you're right. It's your money." Smokey happily pulled up a chair as Harvey called 5-card stud and dealt the first card face down. The pot began to build. On the 4th card, Smokey said confidently, "I bet the size of the pot, $1,000. It was clear he was bluffing. Everybody called. "Deal the last card," Mickey said. Harvey dealt the 5th. Everybody checked until they got to Smokey. "Oh, no, Smokey said. There won't be no checking here. $5,000. Everybody was shocked. We could see he was trying to scare us, but nobody wanted to chance $5,000 to make sure. That is, nobody except Mickey. "I call," Mickey said, slowly counting out $5,000 in $100 bills. Smokey looked at Mickey in disbelief. "You're such a fool, man. You've lost," Smokey said, as if Mickey was going to pick his money back up. Smokey waited for a minute, then turned over his whole card. He had nothing, not even a pair. Mickey won it with only ace high. Smokey was devastated, but kept playing. A few hands later, Smokey started looking more dejected than ever. We knew he had something. Sadly shaking his head, "500, he said, throwing it into the pot. "Johnny, I'm out. Ron, I'm out. Brian, I'm out. Eddie, I'm out. Harvey, I'm out. Mickey, I'm out." "I'm sorry, Smokey, but I'm out too," I said. Smokey turned over his whole card. No one was surprised. He had aces back to back. He sat there with his winning hand, the sorriest sight I'd ever seen. Regardless of his begging, I never let him play again after that. Meanwhile, against the larger backdrop of the world around us, anger and confusion were the dominant moods of the day. In addition to the fighting and bloodshed of the Vietnam War, race riots raged in many American cities. The civil rights movement was finally center stage in the nation's consciousness. Because of Motown's prominence, I was overwhelmed with requests for benefit performances, contributions, and endorsements from a multitude of groups. We created the Black Form label so that different voices could express their views, primarily a spoken word series that featured the speeches of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Stokely Carmichael, Ossie Davis, Wallace Terry, Elaine Brown, poets Langston Hughes and Margaret Danner, and Leroy Jones, using the name Amamu Amiri Baraka. In 1963, I released albums of 2 of Dr. King's most inspiring speeches, Great March to Freedom and Great March to Washington. His words aroused deep feelings within me. I saw Motown much like the world Dr. King was fighting for. People of all different races and religions working together harmoniously for a common goal. While I was never too thrilled about that turn-the-other-cheek business, Dr. King showed me the wisdom of nonviolence. Then in April of '68, while at the Copa with the Supremes, I was rocked with horrible news. Dr. King had been assassinated. The very man who had fought with the weapon of nonviolence, violently shot down. He who had refused to hate when all around him were hating, now ironically snuffed out by hate. A man I so loved and admired. A man who was my friend. Trying to contain my anger and shock, I wanted to fight. But who? I knew I had to be part of some kind of organized response. The first person I thought of was Ewart Abner. As president of VJ Records, Ab had greatly impressed me at a convention of disc jockeys in Chicago back in the early '60s. A person of high integrity and a strong sense of black pride, he became our director of ITME in 1967. The other person I needed to respond to this crisis was Junius Griffin. Junius had been an assistant to Dr. King in the mid-'60s. As our publicity director, he was our link to the black community and theirs to us. He kept us in touch with our roots. Junius and Ab accompanied me to meetings in Atlanta. I had been summoned there by calls from Coretta King and Harry Belafonte to put on a benefit concert using Motown artists. That concert launched the Poor People's March to Freedom. held shortly after Dr. King's funeral. I brought Diana and the Supremes, Stevie Wonder, Gladys Knight and the Pips, and the Temptations to perform. Many of us joined the march from Atlanta that would end in Washington, D.C. I was very proud of all the artists who came to donate their time. 2 months later came the killing of Robert Kennedy, and so the hope of the 60s was shattered. Things were crazy now. The bad guys were killing off our dreams one by one. Motown had its own problems. When HDH left the company in 1968, it was a horrible jolt to all of us. Many in the industry wondered if we could even make it. But everybody at the company rallied. I put together a songwriting team that came up with a #1 record on Diana Ross and the Supremes, Love Child. Norman Whitfield started writing with Barrett Strong, and their first collaboration, I Heard It Through the Grapevine, became a #1 hit on both Gladys Knight and the Pips and Marvin Gaye. Then Norman produced Cloud 9 on the Temptations, which won Motown its first Grammy. Christmas of 1968 brought headlines blazing throughout the music industry. In the week ending December 28, Motown had 5 records out of the top 10 on Billboard's Hot 100. #1, Marvin Gaye's I Heard It Through the Grapevine. #2, Stevie Wonder's For Once in My Life. #3, Diana Ross and the Supremes, Love Child. #7, Diana Ross and the Supremes and the Temptations, I'm Gonna Make You Love Me. #10, The Temptations, Cloud 9. Motown had 50% of the top 10 records in the country. What a feat. The verdict was in. We would survive. When I first bought a house in California in the fall of 1968, I had no concrete plans to one day move my whole operation to the West Coast. I wasn't looking down the road that far. Our California office, which now had been open for a few years, was getting busier and busier. And I had been spending so much time in Los Angeles with our various television projects, living there seemed to make sense. As a kid, I'd been to California twice, once in my boxing days and another time to visit my sister Anna, who was living there. I loved the weather and how it somehow felt like the end of the earth to me. And I loved the fact that movies were made there. For those and other reasons, I eventually made it my home. What stands out most dramatically about those first years on the West Coast was the launching of a new young group I had auditioned in Detroit the summer before I moved to L.A. My new creative assistant, Suzanne DePass, had brought them to my attention. I can still remember the intensity we all felt standing there that July morning, watching those 5 young boys from Gary, Indiana perform. 9-year-old Michael, 11-year-old Marlon, 14-year-old Jermaine, and 15 and 17-year-old Tito and Jackie. They meant business. Michael sang with such feeling, inspiration, and pain, like he'd experienced everything he was singing about. All the right clues were there. Their professionalism, their discipline, their talent. Obviously, you've done a lot of hard work and it shows, I told them. The only thing that can stop you from success now is you. Keep your humility and discipline, continue to work hard, and we'll do the rest. Mr. Gordy, Jermaine said, after a glance to his brothers, does this mean you're going to sign us? Yes, I said, yes it does. The boys broke into cheers. Somehow, even at that first meeting, Michael let me know how willing he was to work as hard as necessary to go to the top. And he let me know that he believed I was the person that could get him there.
This book is continued on the other side of the cassette.
Shortly after signing the Jackson 5, I brought them out to California, where the top priority was coming up with their first hit. I was very clear on the musical direction I wanted them to take. Michael reminded me of a young Frankie Lyman, the lead singer of the late 50s group Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. They had a big hit with Why Do Fools Fall in Love. Now I had to come up with something I thought would fit this little kid, Michael, the dynamic lead singer. For days, I walked around the house, singing over and over again a bright little happy tune I was creating with Michael in mind. Oh, baby, da-da-dee-da-dee, da-da-da-da-da. Something I thought was really cute for this little kid. I knew I had a great melody, but now I had to translate it into a song. As with Love Child, I decided to put together a creative commando team to write and produce it. This group we called The Corporation. Deke Richards, Fonz Mizell, Freddie Perrin, and me. When the other guys heard my melody, they came up with the greatest little track. Perfect. We called the song I Want You Back. Released in October of '69, by December, it was on its way to number one.
Oh, baby, give me one more chance. Show you that I love you. And you feel me back in your heart. Oh, darling, I will gladly let you go, baby. Now since I see you in his arms, I want you back. I want you back. Ooh, baby. I want you back. Yeah.
It was now time for the world to meet the Jackson 5. We booked them on the Ed Sullivan Show. Suzanne DePaz went with the boys to New York to supervise the engagement. I sent Deke Richards along with her to help. Because of the 3-hour tape delay, I had not yet seen it when Suzanne called me in California from New York. The show was great. They were a smash. She could barely wait to hear my reaction. I'll call you back in 3 hours, she said. Finally, glued to the TV set, a wide smile plastered itself over my face as I watched Ed Sullivan announce the Jackson 5 to 60 million people. Suzanne had dressed him in brightly colored bell-bottom outfits, cute as can be, terrific. But then, as soon as they started, a feeling of nausea came over me. The tempo was off. I was devastated. The minute it was over, the phone rang. "Well, how'd you like it, boss?" "That tempo," I said. "It was too slow." "Oh," she said somewhat defensively. "Well, that was Deke. He's the producer on the record. I mean, that's what he was here for, wasn't it?" I don't remember specifically what I said next, but it was probably something to the effect that she was in charge, so it had to be her fault. "Why didn't Deke take the damn record?" I screamed. "Play it and get the tempo off of it and count the band off from that. It wouldn't have taken a genius to figure that out." Suzanne was crying by this time. Working with me has not always been easy on other people. In retrospect, I may have been too hard on her. But she was in charge, and that was the only way I knew. The day after the Sullivan Show, the Jackson 5 were proclaimed the new media darlings. The show was heralded as a phenomenon by everybody. The only person who probably noticed the slight tempo change was me. Eventually, Suzanne understood my obsession with perfection. Eventually, she forgave me, I think. The corporation followed with 2 more number 1 records for the Jackson 5, ABC and The Love You Save, with ABC knocking the Beatles' Let It Be out of the top chart position. Then I worked with another writing-producing team, Hal Davis, Willie Hutch, and Bob West, on the Jackson 5's next release, I'll Be There. With it, the J5 made Top 100 history as they became the first group to ever have their first 4 singles go to number 1. I didn't realize that the launching of the Jackson 5 would mark the end of something major for me. They would be the last stars I would develop with the same intensity and emotional investment as I had the earlier Motown artists. They would be the last big stars to come rolling off my assembly line. Just as the Jackson 5 was soaring, Diana Ross and the Supremes were breaking up. Diana was going solo. Her leaving the group took its toll on everybody. For nearly a decade, the Supremes were the symbol of the many triumphs of the Motown machine. Their breakup represented the end of an era, but it was inevitable. The more the public clamored for Diana, the harder it became on Mary Wilson and Cindy Birdsong, and Diana herself. Cindy had replaced Florence Ballard, and now Jean Terrell would replace Diana. The last single on Diana Ross and the Supremes, Someday We'll Be Together, became their 12th number 1 record. They took their final bows together on a high note. The new Supremes came right out with 2 big hits, Up the Ladder to the Roof and Stone Love, both produced by Frank Wilson. They were off and running. Their bookings were strong, and we were ecstatic. Diana's solo career also took off. By the end of 1970, she was at the threshold of becoming the superstar we had always thought she could be. We both wanted to go for it all the way. but our relationship had become complicated. For the past 5 years, she and I had been intensely involved, both professionally and romantically. As in most long-term relationships, the question of marriage had come up. Could our relationship continue without it? Or would marriage destroy our dream, everything we'd worked for? We both knew that the conflict between our personal relationship as lovers and the roles we played professionally was taking its toll. We recognized that my role had become too defined, too demanding, and too unyielding to exist in a loving marriage. And in order to take our dream all the way, my role would have to become maybe even more intense. Emotionally, we were on a collision course. We decided that the best thing to do was to focus on our professional relationship. That meant we would have to end the personal one. We did. In 1971, Diana married a man by the name of Bob Silverstein. I had all kinds of emotions about it. Surprise, shock, pain, but at the same time, relief. Relief because I knew now I would have to concentrate only on her career. That August, Diana gave birth to a baby girl, whom she named Rhonda. Watching her as she grew, it didn't take long for me to realize I was a father. Diana and I finally acknowledged to each other that it was so. She told her husband and would later tell Rhonda. That same year, Marvin Gaye released his greatest conceptual work, What's Going On?
Mother, mother, there's too many of you crying. Brother, 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 there's far too many of you dying.
It was a protest album that addressed Marvin's feelings about Vietnam, pollution, poverty, taxes, and ghetto life. The single, What's Going On, went to #1. Marvin's very first self-written, self-produced album was a major success.
Picket lines and picket signs. Don't punish me with brutality. Talk to me so you can see. Oh, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Yeah, what's going on? What's going on? Oh, what's going on? What's going on?
His music is as relevant today as it was then. Norman Whitfield also had his finger on the pulse of society. Always innovative with songs like Ball of Confusion and Papa Was a Rolling Stone on the Temptations and War on Edwin Starr. And it was the beginning of a whole new era for Stevie Wonder. From his first self-produced album, Where I'm Coming From, to his epic innovations throughout the 70s, Talking Book, Inner Visions, and Songs in the Key of Life. Stevie's lyrics were emotional, poetic, and visual. His chord patterns intricate and different. His music covered many spectrums, blues, pop, reggae, classical, jazz, and Stevie himself. During this time, the artists were not the only ones going in new directions. So was I, the movies. In early 1971, Joe Schoenfield, an agent at William Morris, brought Sidney Furie, a director, and me together to do a movie project about the life of Billie Holiday. When I was a teenager, Billie Holiday had been the queen of the jazz enthusiast. Billie had a song for every emotion. Through her songs, I knew her and I loved her. My brother Robert and I met Billie once at the Flame Show Bar. She let my sister Gwen take a picture of her with me. When she died just a few years later, I went looking for that photograph, but had lost it. My only tangible connection to the great Lady Day. Joe set up a meeting for me with Sidney Furie, the director, and Jay Weston, the producer. They told me how great they thought Diana was and how she would be perfect for the role. At the end of the day, we had a deal. Now 3 of my wishes were coming true: to honor Billie Holiday, to continue moving Diana to unparalleled heights, and to make movies. Everything went well until I started reading the script. Panicked, I called in Suzanne DePass and Shelley Berger to get their opinion. They hated it too. Sidney agreed we needed to get a black writer. But who? Then I realized I already had one: Suzanne. She had been my creative assistant for years now and had proven herself on every other project I'd thrown her way. Why not this one? Me? I've never written a script before, she said. So what, I said, you're one of the smartest people I know. Suzanne, together with an extremely creative singer-songwriter dear to my heart, Chris Clark, rewrote the original screenplay written by Terrence McCloy. The three of them would later be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Screenplay. In the course of researching, Billie's estate had graciously sent us some of her things. One day, while looking through a bunch of photographs spread out on the floor of our production office at Paramount, I heard a giggle from Shelley Berger. "Beej," he said, "have you ever taken a picture with Billie Holiday?" "Oh, yeah, once," I said, "but I lost it a long time ago." "Well, I found it," he said as he handed me a copy of that same photograph taken at the Flame Show Bar many years before. Billie Holiday had had a copy made for herself. At her death, she had only a few things left, and this was one of them. Now this movie was more meaningful to me than ever before. Billy D. Williams and Richard Pryor were selected to star with Diana. While the other casting and pre-production work was going on, Diana did her own homework. She walked around all day and went to sleep at night with headphones on, listening to old live recordings of Billy's. When the director, Sidney Furie, and I heard the recordings Gil Askey made in the studio of Diana singing several Billie Holiday classics, we actually thought we were listening to old recordings of Billie Holiday. It was spooky. I told Gil to pull her back a notch from Billie Holiday and leave a little Diana Ross in there because, after all, her future's got to extend far beyond this picture. On December 3rd, 1971, in the Los Feliz section of Los Angeles, that looked just like the Baltimore of Billie Holiday's youth, we rode camper. In making any movie, there are days of major panic. One I'll never forget happened about halfway through shooting when Eddie Sieta, an assistant unit production manager, came to me saying, "I may get fired for this, but Mr. Gordy, we're running out of money." I had guaranteed to pay deficit financing, which may not be responsible for paying any amount over our $2 million budget. I talked to the auditors and they confirmed that yes, we had used up 95% of the budget and I was only halfway through the film. People in the business told me that all movies go over budget and this one was so great that I would have no problem getting more money from Paramount. I paid a visit to Frankie Blondes, the studio head. "How's it going, my friend?" he said. Fine. We're doing Academy Award caliber stuff here, but I just wanted you to know that we're going a little over budget and we should rework it." Frank laughed out loud. "What are you talking about, rework the budget? You kidding? The budget for other black films is $500,000 tops. We're giving you $2 million. "Well, this is not exactly what you call a black film," I said. "This is a film with black stars. If you're out of money," he said, "I suggest you end the film right where it's at." "We're right in the middle of it. How can I do that?" "Easy," he said. "Just fade to black and put letters on the screen that say THEEND. "Oh," I said, "is there anything else I can do?" "Well, you can pay everything over $2 million like you agreed, and you'll get your money back after deferments, distribution fees, prints and ads, and everything else. Or," he said with a smile, "just bring me a check for $2 million and the film is yours to do whatever you want with it." "Fine," I said, heading for the door. The next day I handed a shocked Frankie Blondes a check for $2 million. Lady Sings the Blues opened in October of 1972 at Lowe's State 1 in New York, breaking the attendance record previously set by Love Story. It was a big moment for all of us when it was later nominated for 5 Academy Awards, including Diana Ross for Best Actress. Being an entrepreneur and having a hand in everything at my company had always worked for me. But looking back, I can see it was around the mid-'70s that it started working against me. The executive chain of command at Motown was fuzzy since everybody only knew one real boss, me. And their boss had a major preoccupation, making his second movie. In many ways, Mahogany was one of the most exciting projects I'd ever done. I ultimately became the director. Rob Cohen, the young producer I had hired to run Motown Productions, brought in the new project, again starring Diana Ross and Billy D. Williams. Mahogany was the story of a young woman from the inner city ghettos of Chicago who dreams of being a big fashion designer. She eventually makes it to the top, and at the height of her career in Europe, she realizes that the happiness she really seeks in life has always been back home in her own neighborhood. That theme echoed my own feelings that happiness is within you, and that real fun and real love are usually in the valley where we start out, rather than the mountaintop where we hope to end up. Aware of Diana's love for fashion design, I knew she'd be thrilled to act out one of her dreams. We shot in Chicago and in Rome, where the production went well, but tension was growing between Diana and me. Diana was under more and more strain. My decision to let her design the gowns in the movie in the first place, something I knew would mean a lot to her, had come back to haunt me. She was attacking that project with a vengeance, staying up all hours working on the clothes. Usually exhausted, her acting sometimes suffered. I was pushing hard, like I had done throughout her career, but now it seemed to bother her a lot more. I could feel her resentment growing. By the end of February 1975, we were almost finished shooting. All we had left to do now were some pickup shots and pieces of scenes needed to provide continuity. When Diana came to the set, the second to the last day of shooting, her nerves were on edge. Everything I said to her was met with cool. We had just finished shooting one of the pickup scenes when I told Diana we had to do another take. She refused. I insisted. Then she did something, I don't know what it was, a slap, a shove, something. All I knew is my glasses flew across the room. She stormed out, saying she was going home. I was embarrassed but hurried after her. She couldn't be going home, just a threat made in a heated moment. But when I walked into her trailer and saw she was throwing her things together, I knew she was serious. I tried to talk her out of it, reminding her I had put up some money for the film. But she had had it with the film, and me. The hands and arms of my secretary, Edna Anderson, doubled for Diana's in the pickup shots. The movie was not hurt by Diana's leaving, but I was. I don't know what I was expecting when I got to the theater the morning Mahogany opened in New York. But what I was not expecting was to see nobody. And that's just what I saw, nobody. My body ached with sadness. We had promoted the hell out of Mahogany. The theme for Mahogany was already on its way to #1. People loved Diana and Billy D. So where was everybody? Back at my hotel suite after the showing, the phone rang. Mike Roshkin, the head of my PR department, yelled, "It's a smash." "What do you mean, smash?" I said. I was there. The house was practically empty. "Yeah, I know," Mike said, "but we had a third of a house. Twice the number of people The Godfather drew the first day at the same 10 a.m. show. They're predicting sellouts, lines around the block, starting with the 5 o'clock show." "They can tell that fast?" I questioned. "They can tell that fast." Mike was right, not only for the 5 o'clock, but for the 8 and 12 o'clock shows as well. Soon they were running ads letting crowds know they were open all night, adding a 5 a.m. show. Despite that major triumph, Mahogany was a personal disaster, and that things would never be the same between Diana and me. My favorite line from the movie, "Success is nothing without someone you love to share it with," had become painfully relevant. Diana's walking off the set in Rome signaled the beginning of the end of a great symphony.
A writer who takes a spin to write the words again, that all in love is fair.
Part 4, All in Love is Fair. November 28th, 1979. 4 years later. I was sitting alone in a jacuzzi in a plush suite at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. It was my birthday. I was depressed. I had a lot on my mind. I had to analyze what was going on in my company. Our popularity, like our overhead, was growing, while our revenues, like our roster of stars, were shrinking. While we were continuing to sign and launch new artists, some of our top acts had left. Losing a group like the Jackson 5, who left in 1975, took big financial and emotional tolls on the company. In these changing times, the value of a proven artist was skyrocketing into the multi-millions. It was no longer considered unethical when a label decided it wanted to acquire someone else's artist, even while that artist was still under contract. I had a problem with that. To me, it became values versus value. Perhaps stubbornly, I had not always been willing to pay what it took to get an artist to stay. That might have been a mistake. Motown had become dangerously dependent on only a handful of superstars. When we got a new album from one of them, it could mean an influx of millions. When we didn't, it could mean trouble. Now here I was, sitting in a hot tub in Las Vegas, depressed, trying to get it all together. It was my 50th birthday, and all I could think about was overhead. Salespeople, promotion people, advertising, publicity, administration. Even so, on the plane ride home, I was already cheering myself up. Diana's there, Smokey's there, Marvin's there, Stevie's there, the Commodores. I'm going to be fine. By Monday morning, I was optimistic. "Hi, guys," I said cheerfully to the not-too-cheerful-looking Novaks, who were waiting in my office. Still living in Detroit, they had flown out to L.A. for a meeting with me. "Distressing news," Harold said. "Like what?" "You're insolvent," Sidney said. "Insolvent? What do you mean?" "Bankrupt," Harold said. "You got more liabilities than assets." "But how could that be?" "I've been telling you all along, Mr. Gordy," Sidney said. "You're spending too much." He was right. He had told me. Sidneygrams, I call them. Once every few months, like the kid who cried wolf, he would send me a note complaining or warning me about something. I had gotten numb to them. Alan Salke, my personal business advisor, had an answer. His recommendation was to sell Jobette, the highest offer being $27 million. I considered it, but decided instead for the first time in my life to get a business loan from the bank. And so with that loan, we teetered on a tightrope into the 80s. In this crisis, Smokey, as always, wanted to come through with a big hit when the company needed it most. And with the release of Cruisin' from his hit album, Where There's Smoke, he did. More help came from Diana with her album entitled Diana, that had 2 hit singles, Upside Down and I'm Coming Out. And after a disappointing album, Journey Through the Secret Life of Plants, Stevie redeemed himself with his sizzling Hotter Than July album. After a year, I was able to pay off the bank loan. By this time, I had hired Jay Lasker as president of the record company. A veteran in the business, he was known for his marketing genius and tough leadership ability. I had been looking for a czar to run Motown, and Jay was just that. He took many of our biggest hits from over the years and re-released them in new best-of compilations. Not only were we getting hits from some of our established artists and revenue from Jay's marketing techniques, we were also starting to break some new acts. Lionel Richie, who by then had left the Commodores, became very hot in the 80s. Another new act was The Barge, who struck gold with their second album, All This Love. And then there was the brilliant, outrageous Rick James and talented young Tina Marie. As good as everything was, it wasn't enough, but I knew we were on the right track. Then the unthinkable happened. In December of 1980, a man walked into my office, announced himself as a representative of Diana, and told me he was giving me the first option to match a $20 million offer if I wanted to keep her. After Mahogany, I knew things were bound to change between us, but never in my wildest dreams did I see her leaving the company. Only a few months before, she had the biggest album of her career, Diana, and her current single, It's My Turn, was reaching the top 10. Ironically, it was a title song from a movie about a woman going off on her own. I told the man I couldn't comment any further until I talked to Diana. Diana confirmed to me he was indeed representing her. When she and I met privately, and she called me Barry instead of Black, the affectionate nickname we had used for each other over the years, I knew she was leaving. That skinny kid had blossomed into a magnificent creature who romanced the entire world. Images were going off in my brain like flashbulbs. Diana, victorious on stage, raising her hands in triumph, and now, for the first time, moving away. Going for money I could not match. If RCA is willing to pay you that kind of money, I guess you should take it, I told her. In May of 1981, she signed a deal with RCA. I understood logically and rationally why she did it, but it killed me. After 21 years, all of a sudden, she was gone.
A writer takes his pen, write the words again, that all in love is fair.
Taping the Motown 25 TV special was one of the great nights of my life. How do you clearly remember a night when so much of it was spent remembering? A night when you have the most complicated series of emotions you have ever felt. March 25, 1983, was the night of Motown's 25th anniversary celebration. Backstage, artists I hadn't seen for years were hugging and kissing each other and me. Old Home Week. These stars, no matter where they were in their careers now, were still Motowners all the way. Nostalgia came over me as the show began with some old film clips, and I saw the caption Detroit, 1958, and the Hitsville USA sign on our little building. With dramatic music in the background, I heard an announcer's voice. Hitsville, it started here 25 years ago, the sound that rocked the world. Smokey was the first artist to appear on stage. He had been with me even before there was a Motown. Where had all the years gone? That show was one thrill after another. When Dick Clark talked about the revolution Motown had created in the world of music, I thought about the revolution he had created in my life when I first heard Jackie Wilson singing Reet Petite on his show. And what a part he had played in the Supremes' history when they went out on his caravan of stars as nobodies and came back as stars. Before I could recall all the times Dick was there for us, the show had moved on and Motown artists were singing their way through the great moments of my life. One moment it was Smokey and the Miracles, who had not performed together for over a decade, but Shop Around and Tears of a Clown. There was Martha Reeves, strong and soulful with Heat Wave, and Mary Wells singing My Guy. The Commodores captured the feeling of the past few years with Brick House. Then there were the Four Tops and the Temptations, representing something I'd set up many years before, the Battle of the Stars. The two groups met center stage for a musical showdown. Listening to Stevie Wonder singing a medley of his hits, I could see the transformation from that little kid making all that noise in the studio to this exceptional man making his incredible music. When Marvin Gaye sat down at the piano and began improvising some melancholy, jazzy chords, it was deja vu. That was him 23 years before, when my sister Gwen pointed him out at the Hitsville Christmas party. This night at Motown 25, as Marvin saying What's Going On, I was caught up in his magic, his aura. I had no idea this would be the last time I'd ever see him do his thing. A year later, on April 1st, 1984, he was shot and killed by his father. Watching him that night, he reminded me more than ever of Billie Holiday, singing through his pain. Marvin, such a star, such a character, the truest artist I have ever known. When Michael Jackson and his brothers came out on stage for their historic reunion, a current of electricity shot through the whole place. It had begun with an exciting build-up of various clips of a young Jackson 5, from the 1968 audition in Detroit to the Ed Sullivan Show. Then the boys, all grown up, hit the stage, bringing the crowd to their feet. With the drama and precision of their early days, Michael led the group through one great choreographed song after the other and a medley of their Motown hits. He then moved center stage for a solo spot with his latest hit, Billie Jean. It was the most incredible performance I had ever seen. But it was his moonwalk that stunned us all. When the special aired 2 months later, Michael was no longer just a star. He had shot into orbit. As the night drew to a close, I heard Diana's voice coming from the back of the auditorium as she made her entrance singing Ain't No Mountain High Enough, moving down the aisle and up to the stage. All night long, everything had been going too fast, but now everything began to move in slow motion. I started remembering all the problems I was facing with the company. Looking squarely up at me in the balcony, Diana said, "There's a strange thing, but Barry has always felt that he's never been really appreciated." She continued, her eyes locked on mine. "But it's not about the people that leave Motown that's important. It's about the people who come back. And tonight, everybody came back." But I kept thinking to myself, what about tomorrow? Then Diana raised her fist in the power sign to me. My automatic response was to give it back to her, raising both of my fists up and signaling, "Yeah, I'm with you, like always." But just as automatic, my hands changed their mind. They opened up. Let go. I had given up. Not our love. I knew that would always be. What I had given up was my fight for her understanding of me and what I was all about. I thought about a line from one of Stevie's songs, "All is fair in love." While she hadn't given me what I thought I needed, she had given me a dream come true. More thrills than I could have ever imagined. Long ago she had promised me, "If you can think it, I can do it." And she had. She was my star and will always be my leading lady. Far off in the distance, I heard Mary Wilson and Cindy Birdsong joining Diana on the chorus of "Someday We'll Be Together." Meanwhile, other Motown stars were slowly making their way onto the stage singing along. Still looking at me, Diana said, "Well, how long will it take you to get down here, Black?" "Ladies and gentlemen, Barry Gordy." I was surprised. This had not been planned. I felt myself melting. Walking down that aisle, surrounded by a swarm of cheering people, I couldn't contain my burning pride. In front of me was a dreamlike mural, the great cast of characters from my life, waiting anxiously on stage to hug and kiss me. When I reached them, it was as if nothing had ever changed. In these very real minutes, I felt that whatever misunderstandings we might have had with each other meant nothing. Beyond rivalries, beyond misunderstandings, no matter what, they loved me and I loved them. That was a big night for me. Motown 25 closed one chapter on the building of my company and opened another on the selling of it. By the spring of 1983, our troubles were getting worse, especially collections. The independent distributors had gotten weaker over the years. After holding out as long as we could, I made the decision to go to MCA for national distribution. Instead of 15 to 20 different distributors, we could now look to one company for one check, which we knew would be there on time. It worked well for a while, but then the record scene got even more complicated. We had both creative and marketing problems. We couldn't get enough quality frontline product, and promotion costs had skyrocketed. Now it cost around $100,000 just to promote a single record, and that didn't mean you were guaranteed heavy airplay. It was not only that we were losing money, I was losing interest. Ever since I could remember, music was the thing that brought me the most pleasure. But now, after 30 years, it was work. Real work. I realized then, more than ever, that saving a company was much harder than building one. Jay Lasker, my president, came to me one day in 1986 and said that MCA wanted to buy Motown, something that had once been unthinkable. Not anymore. I now understood better what I didn't know when I got into that distribution deal in the first place. Whenever you give up control of your distribution, you give up control of your destiny. It's a natural conflict when a major record company takes over your smaller record label for distribution. They really want to sell their records, not your records. And the only way to make your records their records is for them to buy you out. Even though I understood this and knew how much trouble we were in, selling was still a hard thing to do. I didn't want to let people down. aside from the employees who depended on me for their livelihood. There were so many others who looked to me to preserve Motown's legacy and its black heritage. After backing out at the last minute from that first sale to MCA in 1986, I returned to the bargaining table in early 1988. Motown's attorneys and I met with MCA. When the lawyers from both sides started hammering out the details, the tension really began to mount. The main problem was they were still valuing Motown not by its real worth, but by its current financial statements. That was bad for me. Barry Harold Novak told me, "They're not even coming close to the price we want." "Well, then raise it," I said. "Raise the price? Definitely. If they're not going to put a real value on my company," I told him, "I will." Now the ceiling had become the floor. I had gambled since childhood, but nothing like this. All of a sudden, everything I had worked for was at stake. I was playing the biggest poker hand of my life. One afternoon, Smokey ambled into my office, plopped into a chair, and gave me a knowing look. As always, when I was really in trouble, he was right there, somehow understanding everything without being told. "Man," he said, "I want to get a smash right now more than ever." I smiled. Smokey hadn't changed. He wanted to come through for me. The year before, it was Smokey who had the only 2 singles to make the top 10. Just to See Her, a record that was about to win him his first Grammy, and One Heartbeat. I told him I needed a whole lot more than a smash record. The only way I could save the company now was to sell it. I will always remember the look on Smokey's face. His eyes were like saucers. I felt so bad. Motown was his life. He had named his son Barry after me, and his daughter Tamla after our first record label. "I'm tired, Smoke," I said. He was silent for a moment, and then he spoke. "I know you are. I know you are," he said, as he nodded his approval. Friday, June 25th, 1988, 6 a.m. I sat at my computer trying to come up with the first draft of a press release. It was time to explain to the public the reasons behind my decision to sell. Pecking slowly at the keys, I began. After 2 years of intense contemplation and after meeting with a variety of potential purchasers, I stopped writing and leaned back into my chair for a moment, thinking of how pressured the past few months had been. Playing my cards close to the chest, I could not show my eagerness, nor could I allow for any appearance of company weakness. That meant keeping all our engines running, whatever the cost. I could not cut my overhead or dismantle my expensive marketing operation that was costing a fortune. But it all paid off. MCA partnered with Boston Ventures, a financial investment group who seemed to have a much better understanding of the true value of Motown. Boston Ventures put up 80% of the money and met most of my demands. A lot of restrictive legal clauses that were there originally, the thou shalt and shalt nots, were gone, and the deal was straightforward. Now, for an asking price more than 50% higher than when I'd first begun negotiations with MCA, we were selling the record company, which included the Motown name, the catalog of record masters, and the artist recording contracts. I wasn't selling Jobette, the publishing company which owned the rights to most of the Motown songs, or my film and television company. But the deal wasn't over yet. Anything could happen. It was so close to being finalized, my pent-up emotions were at the breaking point. I wanted this deal over. I started back on my press release. I have decided to sell Motown Records to MCA. At that moment, the phone rang. It was Esther, calling from Detroit. "Barry, Motown has been your life for most of your life. Are you really sure you can let it go? Are you sure you won't have seller's remorse? Are you ready to wake up and know that it doesn't belong to you anymore?" "Yes, yes, and yes," I said with the greatest relief I had felt in a long time. Just saying that made me feel good. I thought about how wonderful Esther was, the same person who had been so reluctant to give me that loan at the Burberry meeting, had put in 30 years helping me with my dream. That same person then pulled together all the stuff I'd left behind in Hitsville and Detroit and started a museum with it. Within an hour, I was finishing up my press release. After 2 years of intense contemplation, I have decided to sell Motown Records to MCA. Motown has become an American institution. It is the nature of institutions to take on their own life and to outgrow the individuals who create them. I am proud that this African-American heritage has been embraced by the world and has become permanently woven into the fabric of popular culture. On Tuesday, June 29, 1988, the headlines blasted the news. I had sold Motown Records to MCA for $61 million. From $800 to $61 million, I had done it. I had won the poker hand. But money is only a part of value. There was much more. The total value was saving the company and keeping the legacy intact. These weren't just records. This was a body of work that in itself was an institution. I had to put it into the right hands under the right conditions at a time when I was losing a fortune. That was the real poker hand. In the meantime, I was still in business. I set up the Gordy company to oversee the various entities I still own, such as Joe Bett and Motown Productions. And I had my life, my family being such an important part of it. I have 8 wonderful children: Hazel, Barry the Fourth, Terry, Carrie, Sherry, Kennedy, Rhonda, and Stephen, who have gone on to lead very diverse and successful lives. The best part of it is that they are all wonderful human beings. I could not be more proud of them. 4 months after the sale went through, I stood at the large paned window in my suite at the Omni Hotel, absorbing the sights of the vast terrain of the Detroit metropolitan area. Dusk. The city lights, some yellow, some white, slowly creeping on, brought into focus a magical glow. I had moved to California over 20 years before. Now I was looking back over the city where I grew up, where my roots were. Once my vision could only take in a couple of blocks in the inner city. Now I was looking over all of Detroit and beyond. I had come full circle. I had come home. I had returned with my protege, the top superstar in the world, Michael Jackson, who had agreed to make a contribution to the Motown Museum. The next day, despite the pouring rain, 2,500 fans crowded out in front of Hitsville to witness Michael Jackson's presentation of a check for $125,000. He also donated to the museum a hat, a rhinestone glove, and a stage uniform from 1972. On the podium, in the hard-driving rain, standing beside Michael, my sister Esther, and the mayor of Detroit, Coleman Young, I felt the kind of pride I'd felt on the night of Motown 25. Not just in myself and in Michael, but in Detroit, my home, the place that nurtured me. For a moment, I was that 8-year-old kid again, running out of the house after Joe Louis had knocked out Max Schmeling, thinking, how could I ever do anything in my life that could make this many people happy? And in that one moment, I thought maybe I had come close.
This has been a Time Warner Audiobooks production of To Be Loved, written by Barry Gordy and read for you by the author. Produced and directed by Maya Thomas. Text abridged by Nicole Dillenberg. Tape edited, mixed, and mastered by Mark Waldrop and Martin Royer. Special thanks to Christy Burton, Mim Eichler, Brenda Boyce, Linda Palmer, and Ewart Abner.